see if this works. This is the most technology I've used outside of the Atacama Desert, but hopefully all will be well. And we should be going live on YouTube as we speak. Yes, there we are. Hello, everybody listening out on YouTube, on Twitter Spaces, in the multiverse, in the metaverse. I think this is quite fun to do. We should take advantage of all the good technology and bring together good friends and people of goodwill and good faith. And so with that in mind, I wanted to close out the month of December, the year that was 2021, with one of my best friends. I won't say oldest friends. I will say one of my best looking friends. And that is the way he needs to be addressed. And that is, of course, Dr. Eric Weinstein. Let me bring him in over here. How are you, sir? You are now.
Brian, good to be with you.
It's great to be with you. And we have a lot of people watching all over the universe. And I wanted to first kind of give you some hearty congratulations, because you have had a really significant year of many accomplishments, and we're going to get into those accomplishments. In particular, you have just recently, I noticed, joined the research wing of the so-called Galileo project, or Project Galileo, led by mutual friend Professor Avi Loeb, a man who is not shy from controversy. And I want to ask you, what was your decision-making process? Walk me through the process that led to you really joining forces and partnering with an institution that you don't necessarily have a lot of love for, but
Well, that's not fair.
Okay, so talk us through the process.
I believe that in essence, there's a story about the night I ate a plate full of sautéed mushrooms at Isidore Singer's house because I couldn't figure out how to say that I wasn't an adult to his lovely wife, Rosemary. And I feel like with UFOs, I came to hate the topic while growing up. Never took an interest, wasn't a big science fiction person. And then, I gradually found that people around me who I thought well of were taking this more seriously than I was. And I found that the ridicule that I was reflexively doling out for the topic was being met with different sorts of answers by some people. Mm-hmm. I should say that there's a subset of UFO land that's just crazy. Mm-hmm. But there's been a huge shift. And no matter what this is, anything from PSYOP to, our future selves are visiting us in the past in a crazy universe that has physics we don't understand yet, whatever it is, it's being taken seriously enough by our Pentagon. It's being taken seriously enough by people in positions where they have some sort of security clearance for me to say, I want to take this black box seriously because I don't know what's in it. Mm-hmm. And that includes the possibility of a psychological operation, or, we're trying to come up with a cover story because we've got advanced tech that we don't want our adversaries to know about. But it's completely irresponsible to take the position that I was taking at this point. This is no longer the Loch Ness Monster. And then, you have the problem of like, now do I have to take the Loch Ness Monster seriously? The idea that this is coupled to people who do remote viewing, the whole thing seems very unsavory. And because of the luxurious position I'm in, where I trust my relationship with my employer at a level that I've never trusted an employer before. Mm-hmm. That could end up being my undoing, but I think that it's important that people with certain kinds of credentials take this seriously, to take a lead, to destigmatize it. And I'm
I hear you. Your camera seems to be frozen. That's true. So let us. Yeah, this has happened. We are now muted on YouTube, at least on Eric's side. So we'll try to patch this up. Just as you were talking about, interlopers and so forth. There you are. You're back. Now we have a camera view of your coffee cup. Back live. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let's work on your camera again, Eric. It's frozen or and it's pointed a little too low. Uh, oh, okay. Are you able to log back out, log back in? That seemed to do it before. Um, so I've noticed this year I've done, I'm also an advisor, an external advisor to Avi Loeb's so-called Project Galileo. And if I could have asked Avi to consider one thing before he went ahead with the naming of it, I always find it perilous when astronomers compare themselves to either, Galileo or Giordano Bruno, or all these great astronomers who met untimely fortunes in one sense or another. I find that is not entirely helpful. But on the other hand, what he's trying to do, beyond just the hopeful avoid the awful end that Galileo had, is to use data to investigate phenomena that, if real, would fall under the purview of some aspects of the standard model of physics. And let's see, Eric is back here. Let's see. Now you're in the green room. Let me add you to the right. There you go. So we see you now. Very good. So I was just saying, Eric, if Galileo is to be taken seriously, hopefully it's not the way he was, threatened with torture, but rather that he was using data for the very first time to assay or check, and we'll get into assaying and stuff later, laws of nature using instruments that he built to, do what he said to do, was to measure what's measurable and make measurable what is not so. I want to ask you, what do you think is possible to measure that we have not been able to make measurable yet? Are there technologies, or is it just more of the same with optical telescopes, radio telescopes, et cetera? Or do you think it's going to require a technological advance that we're not currently capable of?
Well, so I keep thinking about the three long-range fields that we've used for telescopy: the photon, the neutrino, and the gravity wave. And I think that if you think about this in terms of known physics, it's really interesting to me to watch our colleagues talk about what is possible and what is impossible, assuming that the theories we have now are not effective theories, but are fundamental theories. Mm-hmm. So a number of people will say things like, well, so-and-so is impossible by the laws of relativity. And you would say, well, it's impossible within relativity. But if you were to try to describe, let's say, Lorentz contraction or time dilation inside of Newtonian physics, you'd have all sorts of surprises in store for you. Same thing with trying to figure out double slit experiments from a Newtonian perspective. So in part, we don't know what theories are to come. And I think one of the things that I've come to understand about the whole UFO UAP controversy is that it's really very different. If you imagine that you are getting your physics from technology that was constructed by civilizations that you don't know anything about, which is, what you're talking about in the most optimistic UAP scenario, UFO. Mm-hmm. What you're doing is you're looking at somebody's engineered craft. It's like you're trying to understand radio waves by looking at a radio rather than looking at radio waves by looking at the electromagnetic spectrum. Mm-hmm. And I think that has given this field a very weird feel to it. It means that our aerospace corporations are much more deep in the weeds in what would normally be science than we expect. I think one of the things that I've learned is that our government doesn't trust open scientific culture, that for a brief period of time, you could get a bunch of physicists to keep mum more or less out in the desert during World War II, but this is in general not a trusted paradigm. And so in part, what we're doing is we're working with a lot of people who are sort of physics adjacent, like electrical engineers, right, or material science people. So maybe some of that is physics, but it's not the right neighborhood of physics for the intergalactic travel part of this. And there is just a dearth of high-level physics talent and sort of differential geometric talent who are looking at this question, because for some reason we don't take it very seriously. And
Yeah.
quite honestly, I'm very sympathetic with the fact that we are bigoted and don't take it very seriously, because it sounds completely goofy,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Even the kind of scene that was shown last night with on I don't know if it was Today or something like that, where the newscaster started off the broadcast with the X-Files, and and it's like, if you're trying to make this take this as seriously as you and I believe it should be taken, then connecting it to the theme song or the theme of a television show that was I want to believe. I mean, do you want to believe in things, Eric, as a scientist? I mean, how do you reconcile that?
Well, let's put it this way. My life is not so dull that I need aliens to liven it up, right? Um, but let's take three different topics that I think are important.
Mm-hmm.
Unidentified aircraft in military airspaces, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
The second one would be psychedelics and healing. And the third one would be human sexuality, and in particular, porn. You'll notice that there's a giggle on each one of them. And as a result, you have these forces that are completely, potentially altering our civilization in various ways. We could be doing a great job of healing with psychedelics, and yet we're still laughing about, oh, so-and-so was tripping, that kind of nonsense. And it's not terrible to tell sex jokes or to tell drug jokes.
No.
It's just that there's got to be a way to send the kids to bed so that you can actually have a serious conversation about these things. And one of the problems that we're having is that the public sphere is pervaded by a certain ethos, a culture, which I've sometimes called the degraded state, where you're just sort of snarking and you're making trivial jokes and you're memeing and you're calling it awesome and you're saying, oh, you don't get the internet. And it's like, well, actually, maybe you don't get life and the opportunity that we have. That earnestness probably is trading at a discount. And if we were to take psychedelics more seriously, like how many special forces guys who risked their lives for our country could we save if we got some of these drugs off of Schedule 1 where they don't belong?
Are you talking about like psychedelics or what?
Yeah, I'm talking about LSD and DMT,
Mm-hmm.
things that will cause people to raise an eyebrow,
Mm-hmm.
right? The idea that these things are not therapeutic or have a high potential for harm has been disproven, yet they sit there on a list which clearly has those as its twin criteria. Doesn't make any sense. The porn explosion is a serious epidemic, and we're not talking about what it really means, whether it's sex positive, which it is in part, and whether it's destroying lives, which it is in part. Why? Because we can't get through it without laughing. And I think the same thing is true with UAP. It's like, oh, the truth is out there. Oh, tinfoil hat. Oh my God, flying saucer. Would you shut up? I don't know what to do with it. It's like, these are the serious issues of our lives. Our Pentagon released a report. And if it is that just them having a few yucks, hey, I got it. We'll put out a report and we'll talk about UFOs. I think we scientists should follow it down just the way the Amazing Randy did.
Yeah, the problem is, I had a live stream with my friend Kurt Jaimungal, our mutual friend, who is somewhere in the chat room, I hope, and it was with Tom DeLonge and this former CIA operative named Jimmy Semivan, and I got a lot of heat for that one from a lot of people that watch my show. How can a legitimate scientist entertain this? And then I had on, you and then a skeptic like Michael Shermer together just after prior to the Pentagon report in June, and we want to get to that. And so I get it from all sides. But one thing, I haven't asked, besides you and Michael, I would have back on. I don't know if I'd have Tom DeLonge on. In other words, I think I extracted, as a UFOologist would do, extracted all the kind of interesting content from Tom. I think he's a great guy. He's fun. I'd love to hang out and go skateboarding and play music with him, or at least play Spotify. That's the only thing I can play, unlike you. But I found it very kind of unsatisfying that kind of the evidence that he was presenting, including the remains of.
No, but let's be efficient about it. What's really going on is something different, which is that people aren't actually listening to try to figure out what's being said. They're trying to say, tell me the minimal thing I can hear from you so I know I never have to listen to you ever again. And that's been confused now with it's not the scientific method, it's the internet method.
Right.
And the internet method is like, I just want you to say something dumb that I can, maybe if I have to, I'll take it out of context, but almost everyone has brain farts, or they lie, or they get caught in something. And then the idea is, can I just put that on repeat so I never have to see you or hear from you again? And I think that that's a large portion of what science has been doing. I don't want to respond to crazy people who say, hey, I'm bending spoons in my garage, and I've been abducted, and you have to check out all of my claims because I have a warp drive that'll get us out of here. Why are you ignoring me? Like, that person writes to me.
Right.
Well, okay, so we need better ways of dismissing claims that aren't this wholesale, you can't talk to somebody. Like, one of the things that we have is in the neo-Darwinian world, we have a claim, no creationist paper has ever passed peer review. Okay, so you're staking everything on the idea that you have a filter and that nothing has ever gotten through the filter. Well, what if somebody does a pretty terrific study of something, and then they leave the door open to creationism? Are we going to lose the science because they made an offhand remark at the end of their paper that maybe we have to rethink things, and it could be, it might not even be a creationist paper. Well, as soon as you come up with these rules, like, no scientist has ever done it, it's a desire for artificial cleanliness is what it is. Right. And I think that what we've got to recognize is that a lot of the people that you see who are giving you this heat are coming at it from this different perspective, which is, I want Oumuamua to go away. I want Avi Loeb taking this serious. I want to just say he's a careerist and that this is just an attempt to get money. And I understand where that's coming from, but it's also an incredibly destructive impulse. I mean, can you imagine if when Benjamin Jesty took cow pus and stuck it into his family to try to keep them safe from smallpox, what would be said about him on Twitter?
Right. Whereas you and I have said, with James Clerk Maxwell's equations that were propagated by gears and vortices and, of course, an ether, and let alone it made great advances. And actually, in cosmology, our hands aren't as clean as those wonderful Darwinian evolutionary, macroevolutionary, because we published many, many papers on the steady state, the quasi-steady state, all sorts of other things. In addition to things like the multiverse, which our friend and mutual EW, Ed Witten, has come to apparently learn to love.
This is crazy. I mean, I don't know if people are following this story.
Yeah. What, you want to summarize it? Or I can summarize the multiverse perspective. If you want to talk about the landscape, or at least the string theory aspects of it, which are very troubling.
One of you, I'll use a Britishism. You're very brave, Brian. Perhaps you should go first.
Well, maybe Edward is following this conversation.
Undoubtedly,
I doubt it too. He only seems to follow things that are negative about Israel. But be that as it may, if he's out there, he's always welcome to come on. I noted there was a CERN Courier, which is one of the most prestigious, kind of non-journal type journals that is a must-read. That he had an interview and kind of commemorating. I forget exactly what the occasion was, but he was kind of reflecting on 25 years since maybe, I don't know, the miracle or something like that, or the construction of CERN. And he was saying, how much of his perspective has changed. And in one sense, he said very little. It's been so spectacular, successful. The standard model is very hard to break and to make progress. And of course, the interviewer asked him about the, his thoughts on things like the string theory landscape, which postulates that, for all the different possible vacuum configurations, there are corresponding different constants of nature, laws of physics, perhaps even, and this is known as the landscape and or the swampland, depending on who you talk to. And it has a very direct correspondence, and some say that's a good thing. I think it's kind of frightening, actually, but to the multiverse of cosmology, which is postulated by logical extrapolation from inflation theory. So he's now saying that, he used to not like these anthropic kind of arguments, but, he's learned to kind of adapt to them and adjust to them as part of natural expectation. And, basically we should stop telling the universe what to do. But as one person said, isn't that just giving up? Like, if you're going to just adopt the multiverse or the landscape as a possibility, then, what point is there in doing physics at this point? So how did you react to that interview, that I'd sent out?
Oh boy. So first of all, let's say the positive part, which is that I think there was an old view that nobody holds anymore, which said that if we could just understand the law, maybe pre-Laplace, if we could just understand the laws of nature, we could compute its consequences and know the future.
Yeah.
And I think that this strong reductionism doesn't really exist. It's a straw man in our day and age. Everyone now understands that some of the properties of the world are sort of properties of the equations, or for the few physicists in the audience, the Lagrangian. Some parts of this have to do with the solutions of the equations, that certain solutions of the equations have certain properties that we think of as normal, but there are other solutions that we know nothing about, and so we are stuck in a subset of the solutions. And some of this has to do with what might be a confusion that we should be on the lookout for. You think that there's a number that means something, but that number is actually the value of a field that changes in space and time. So I might say that I'm kind of chilly in this room. It's probably 64 degrees in here, something like that. But it's not a uniform number. It's a number that changes depending upon where I am in the room. And if I said that the temperature in the room is 64 degrees, I would be making this confusion in a way that's very easy to understand. So I think that there's a lot of room for kind of humility and discipline with respect to saying, I wonder what part of this is anthropic, what part of this is a property of the solutions, which is part of the equations, what is a vacuum expectation value that is actually a field that has been excited to some level that is reasonably constant where we live, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's all healthy and positive. And I think it's great that he said that. The part that I don't like is, wait a minute, you just took the entire field of physics on a nearly 40-year adventure, which was characterized in the early portion by getting rid of your competitors, by saying, well, I have the whole thing wrapped up by noontime tomorrow, because there are only, a finite number of theories to investigate, and nothing else has the power and glory of string theory. All who can see it will be healed. Amen. I mean, the crimes of string theorists are very different than the issues with string theory. String theory is not going to hurt anybody. It's a bunch of equations and ideas and complex of stuff. But when you have people, even that we respect, like Natty Seiberg, saying, oh, if string theory will be right, because if anyone comes up with anything that isn't string theory, we'll call it string theory.
Right.
And you're thinking like, well, are you allowed to say that? I think that what we need to do is to recognize that collegiality in academics is a resource. And what academics looks like in the absence of collegiality, where you're just full Hunger Games, right? And you announce your strategy. Hey, I only invited you to dinner so that I could execute you and eat you. Well, wait, what? I have this very strong negative feeling. So you're telling me we should work on something, and then if we get it right and you have it wrong, you'll just call it what you were doing to begin with, and you're announcing this to the world. It's sort of a joke, but it really isn't. I think that there's something about string theory, that it's an enormous complex of interrelated ideas that clearly means something. We don't know what it means, and what it means may not be about physics. What it means may be about pure mathematics, infinite dimensional structures, extended objects, all of this stuff. When we found out that quantum field theory wasn't about physics in the 80s, it was a complete shock to me. And it didn't seem to register to too many people that when topological quantum field theory came out, it was very similar to what happened with ADS-CFT sort of a decade later, which is that you connected things that showed that what you were working on didn't mean what you said. So for example, with strings, it was claimed that string theory could do things that gauge theories couldn't. But then if you have some sort of holographic principle or duality principle or any kind of a principle that says, oh, this string theory is dual to a gauge theory, you just sort of undercut your own argument. Much the way, in my opinion, when we found out that topological quantum field theories existed, they didn't have anything to do with physics. They had to do with the formal structure. And it was very much like liberating calculus from wherever it was initially discovered in the sciences. It turns out calculus is useful for everything. So you might invent, let's say, quaternions or something for a very particular purpose, but once you've invented it, it belongs to the world. And I believe that partially what we found out is that the justification for string theory has somewhat evaporated. which is maybe gauge theories can do what string theories can do. Maybe there are dualities and relationships and holographic principles and correspondences that are much richer, and that maybe string theory is hanging together in a certain mathematical sense, not because it has anything to do with the physical world. It could be hanging together because it's a piece of pure mathematics, much the way, quadratic reciprocity is true, but it doesn't need to come from the physical world as we know it.
Yeah. When I look back again, it's always dangerous when physicists talk about history or philosophy or religion, but I think, it's
when they're sober.
we shouldn't be, forbidden to talk about it, but we should do so judiciously. And, and I look at, some of these comments, and I've had the honor and pleasure of, talking to many people over the past couple of years since I started this project. And I keep coming back to this question of, what, and I'm not the first to do this. Obviously, if, Feynman said, I don't care how beautiful your theory is, if it doesn't agree with the experiment, it's wrong. But Eric, we're in a situation where we're told that the experiments don't exist. They can't exist. We can't make them. And I often say, look, if I told Ed Witten, in 1971, when he was working, right next door to Frank Wilczek.
Was he 73?
Well,
he started graduate school in 73. Maybe I have that wrong.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, yeah,
I think he was working on the McGovern campaign. Anyway, keep going. I could be wrong.
Again, so I retract what I said about physicists and history, because obviously I'm talking.
I'm a podcaster. I'm an entertainer.
You're an internet celebrity. And I said, well, what if I told you back then, we'll have these colliders, but they won't collide, protons and antiprotons or electron scattering. No, they'll collide, entities made up of 10 to the 56 neutrons together. Two of them, 30 solar mass neutron stars or whatever, multi-solar mass neutrons. We'll collide them together at a few times the speed of, or a few percent of the speed of light. Would you take that? Would that be enough to tell you? Would they have said at that point, Eric, no, we need something beyond the LHC? I mean,
it's an interesting question.
Yeah. I mean, what do we make of this? Because a theorist will hide, let me say this, an experimentalist will hide our results. I'm speaking on behalf of myself only. We often hide our, I wouldn't say dirty laundry, but we'll hide behind the upper limit. So what is an upper limit? An upper limit is saying, we're not going to put a stake in the ground that we made a detection. We know it's not bigger than a certain value. And so therefore, we don't have to do quite as much to rule out or to rule out other competitive explanations, because it's consistent with noise. And so you don't spend your time, seeing what other sources of noise. You account for the systematic noise, the statistical noise, and then you're done with an upper limit. A detection is different. Now, I think the corresponding complementary perspective, as Frank Wilczek would call it, is when a theorist says, oh, we can't know unless you tell us either the vacuum state of our own theory, or you build us the future galactic, pan-galactic collider. So I think physics has a problem, in that we have a courage problem, and we're not really willing to go out and say that's impossible, or, the fruit on the apple tree is way too high to be picked.
Got it. Couple things. First of all, so your first point was a cryptic reference to, I think, LIGO and what we can pick up now.
That's right.
I should point out that Murray Gell-Mann, as early as 1983 at the Second Shelter Island Conference, is very clear in his keynote speech that we should be using cosmic rays and the debris from the universe as a substitute accelerator. Mm-hmm. In some sense, a more powerful but less predictable one. You get what you get. You can't schedule these collisions between black holes the way you'd like to. So getting beam time is kind of a weird thing, if you know that reference. Yeah. I would say that the issue is what we talked about before. The reason nobody wants to say sharp things is this idea of, and I'm going to bring it back to Feynman, because I'm having a weird beef, not with Feynman so much, but with the fact that the internet has discerned a lot of meaning from him, which is just wrong. Yeah. And he was playing to the cheap seats. I think that he made a lot of very simple, powerful statements, which people love because they're not very difficult to understand, but they're also not correct.
They're pithy.
So one of them is that if your theory doesn't agree with your experiments, it's wrong. Well, no, that's not true. I mean, the issue is the instance of your theory, the instantiation of your theory is wrong, provided that the experiment was in fact done correctly and there is that discrepancy. But I think that what we really haven't acknowledged this point. We've developed this very bad habit of going after the kill shot. Oh, Blas Cabrera saw a monopole in his laboratory
on Valentine's Day in 1990.
Yeah. So, but it's never happened again. So he can't be trusted. Who's next?
Right. Canceled.
Right. Exactly. And then the next one is like, oh, the string theorists, they said that they were going to do everything and they didn't do anything. And
Frank Wilczek promised supersymmetry from the LHC Run 1.
What about Gordon Kane?
Loser.
Yeah. Like, and the answer is, this is ridiculous and it's unbecoming. It shows that we're not really a science at the moment. Can you imagine if QED was wrong, quantum electrodynamics was wrong because Dirac, got this prediction of the proton and the electron wrong? This is dumb. It would take out Einstein. It basically is a rebellion against, and I'm going to be like not so nice. It's a rebellion like by the copyrights against the authors. It's like, oh, if I can find a spelling error, then I can throw out Hamlet. Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that's how science works. So thanks for the information. I think it's really important that we stop trying to go after string theory. I think string theory is not going to hurt anybody. The key issue is string theory culture. And the thing that I'm really against is the idea that we don't want to say certain things. We are all so thankful that Ed Witten passed through that we don't want to talk about the fact that he probably made a disastrous bet veering the field towards string theory in a very unconcentrated portfolio of approaches. And wait. It's not an anti-Ed Witten point. If you ask me what, the closest I get to an anti-Ed Witten point is, why aren't you taking responsibility for what you did to the field? Right now, it needs to be wide open. It needs lots of different people. And I think that the string theorists have a persistent sort of complaint, which is none of the rest of you have taken the issues of renormalizability and compatibility of gravity with the standard model as seriously as we have. And therefore, we don't trust you with the car keys. And I think that, in some level, well, maybe you guys didn't take seriously enough the idea that this wasn't really beautiful. Like the argument that this is all so beautiful has empowered our friend Sabina to go on an anti-beauty tirade that has really nothing to do with anything. She's just that the string theorists used beauty
as Eric, I lost your sound.
Oh no!
Did you do something? Hello? I'm not hearing you anywhere.
Do you hear me at all?
Twitter or YouTube. Is your phone acting up? All right, we lost him. So I'll take just a second to chime in with two. For every Feynman quote, there's an equal and opposite Feynman quote. And in addition to his saying when he won the Nobel Prize that if I could explain it to you, it wouldn't be worth a Nobel Prize, he's also rumored to have said that if you can't explain it to your grandmother, then you don't understand it. So which one was it? So Eric, I know I don't see you. I hear you, I think, on Twitter. Can you say something, Eric? Eric, can you hear me? Eric, I hear rustling at least on Twitter Spaces, but I don't hear, and I've lost you on YouTube. Now I hear myself. So people are saying, yeah, I can hear you on Twitter now. Yep. Okay. Oh yeah, there we go.
Stable enough.
I see. I see you. I hear you on Twitter. Let me turn it down. Let me see. Do I hear you on YouTube? Say something again. Can you hear?
Are you?
Yeah, I hear you.
Catching this?
Yeah, I hear you now. I think it's fine. Folks, can you say anything else? Can you let us know out there if you can hear us? There we go. Eric, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so we were talking about Ed Witten, and I do want to make one comment. I want to get your reaction to this because I have a guest coming up by the name of Christopher Sweat, who is kind of a philosopher. He's an intellectual, but he's African American, and he hates this notion of black intellectuals. he hates to have there be thought of this, who is speaking for the black community, and let them come forth, and they are intellectuals. Like, I don't know if anyone thinks of me as a white intellectual, but the point, Ed is, and now you're frozen again, damn it. Can you move over? Yeah, I hear you on Twitter. Can you hear me, Eric, still?
I can hear you.
Okay, I hear you on Twitter. I don't see you on. Let me log you back in. But the point being that we have, this notion of leaders in a field, and then these leaders have some responsibility if they're going to accept that mantle. And as Christopher's saying, in the black community, I mean, who can possibly say that they speak for the black community as a black intellectual, et cetera, et cetera? And this is right or left. I'm not choosing sides. But in the context of of a particle physics or string theory, clearly Ed is a leader in a certain sense. What does that entail? What responsibilities does he have to, as the de facto leader in the case where there is no leader, let whoever is willing to lead come forward? So what responsibility does Ed have? After all, he's made very clear statements about string theory, including that he believes that string theory is the only theory of any form of geometric or a theory of everything that can incorporate the Yang-Mills equations in a self-consistent manner. I hear you. Yeah, I hear you on Twitter. Let me see. People hear him on YouTube. Let me check that out. So, no, I don't hear you on YouTube, unfortunately. Can you talk? Yeah. Keep making noises.
How about now? Does that work?
Yes, that works now. Perfect.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, this is nonsense. I don't know how to say it politely. Ed Witten is a leader, as is David Gross. Yep. I think that Nima Arkani Hamed is a non-string theory leader. Mm-hmm. You find out who the leaders are by who gets the keynotes and who makes decisions about where the field is going to go and how DOE funds things. This is nonsense. We have to recognize we have leadership, and I don't know why Christopher Sweat is in this conversation. Ed Witten's a super important human being who directed the field to an enormous extent at a time when it was lost. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important to recognize that we don't experience leadership in our time. I don't know that somebody's given him the talk that says, hey, this isn't your field. It wasn't Einstein's, it wasn't Newton's, it wasn't Dirac. You have responsibilities. You're 70 years old this year. Mm-hmm. And you have got to do certain things that aren't up to you. It's the burden of leadership. And for some reason, we're living in an era in which nobody feels any burden of leadership. I think that, for example, Georgi and Glasgow felt too much burden when their SU5 theory was not immediately confirmed for proton decay. And they immediately fell on their swords. Well, as per our earlier discussion, it's not like grand unified theories went away. Mm-hmm. It's not even like SU5 went away. But this idea of, in an era in which everyone survives, making a mistake doesn't end up as a kill shot. And also your colleagues are decent enough to give you credit for your work, even if there's a flaw somewhere in the theory, if there's a fly in your ointment. And I don't know what planet I'm on. It's very clear that when you're 70 years old and you've spent this much time on a theory and you've taken this number of resources, human, financial, and otherwise, to explore an idea, and it has this little to show for itself. And by the way, I've written extensively about all the positive externalities of the string theorists, geometrizing quantum field theory. And so there's no shortage of positive things I can say. It's not an anti-them thing, but it's sort of at what point do we become adults? And I think that it's really important to recognize that most of us are saying wrong things about science to avoid offending Qumran and Ed, Strominger, Kolchinsky and company. I think that these guys really probably want to get off this train at some level. I think that they want to say something about the field needs to be open and we made some mistakes. And I don't think we need truth and reconciliation, but I think we need to be decent And I think we need to recognize that the real problem was string theory culture, not string theory. And the reason that it was problematic is that it attempted to put other cultures to the sword prematurely based on what it said it was going to do and then failed to deliver. So you say that you shouldn't fund them because we're about to do everything, and then you don't do it. I want to know, well, can we hear more from the people who don't work in physics anymore? Can we hear more from the people who you've trashed? I think about the bootstrap community from Jeff Chu. And I think it's really important that we recognize that, catastrophe theory of Rene Thom didn't work out necessarily the way we expected. We've had all sorts of big theories that, maybe the Reggie calculus didn't go where we thought it was going to go in general relativity. Whatever it is, it's really important and necessary that we cut this out. Are we scientists, or are we postmodern philosophers who play with equations? I don't know.
Yeah, I want to talk about other possible contenders that you've been, particularly exciting my attention to. First, let me see how the sound is on YouTube. If folks can let us know in the chat section, that would be very helpful. And which microphone? Can you tap the microphone that I gave you last Hanukkah? Yeah, so that's not working right now.
All right.
So can you switch over?
I recommend that we move to a more tested video platform for next time.
Yes, we can do that. We can also switch to Skype on the same streaming service, if you like. But let's see if you can just plug in your microphone again. It says that it's a little bit coming. It's coming from your laptop. I think it's mostly okay. I mean, people aren't complaining. Twitter, you sound fine, and that's half the battle. There's actually more people on Twitter than on YouTube, which is kind of interesting.
Well, YouTube will be over time.
Yeah, I do have a channel on YouTube. Folks should know about Dr. Brian Keating, where Eric has been probably my most frequent guest, and last appeared on my 50th birthday this past September, and that was so much fun to have you. And I'm trying to have him on at least once a quarter to go over topics of mutual interest for myself and for Eric. And I think, hopefully for many of you out there, I also do solo videos where I do kind of explainers about experimental physics. There's a lot of theoretical physics out there in the world. And I love Sean Carroll, and I love Sabina, and I love Brian Greene and the guys at PBS Spacetime who I've collaborated with. But I think I want to, really kind of up the ante and kind of production quality of those videos where I'm explaining topics in experimental physics, not just in cosmology, not just the theoretical aspects, although I will get into theory on occasion. As Eric knows, I like to dabble in theory the way a drummer dabbles
more
in
than
music.
that, Brian.
Well, I'm not a professor. I always say to my students, Eric, I say, you're an experimentalist, but that doesn't absolve you of the necessity and burden of understanding the theory. All you are absolved of, my student, I will say, is that you don't have to come up with new theories. You don't have to invent new theories or really, look for extensions or corollaries to them, but you need to understand them. Otherwise, you're just kind of, almost robotically going through the motions. And that's not why I got into physics, to train a bunch of AI, non-sentient beings. And I'm blessed to have so many wonderful students working with me, and also to have in a wonderful amount of high school students, one of which is particularly close to Eric. And I want to get into that and how to train a student. How do you want to train your kids? If you're interested in getting your kids interested in STEM, hit the like button, because Eric and I are working on a project together with our children. We're kind of doing a swap of a certain kind, where my child will learn and get recommendations from Eric, in particular about experimental physics and our experimental cosmology, and I will teach his son about gauge. No, I'm just kidding. We actually do the opposite. So I'm sort of coaching, mentoring Zev Weinstein, who's a brilliant and talented young man that I'm grateful to have some form of influence with, and Eric is tutoring my son, my oldest son, on the most beautiful ways to get adjusted to, as a 10-year-old can at least, to get adjusted to to get adjusted to the concepts of higher mathematics, starting with, of all things, higher dimensional geometry, topology, with a book that Eric bought for my son recently called The Shape of Space, which I'm enjoying him reading to me. It's really wonderful, Eric. And I want to thank you for that on behalf of my son and myself. And let's try your microphone again.
Okay.
How does that sound?
I think it's right.
Yeah, it's a little bit better. Yeah, I think it's okay. So now, before we pivot to how to raise a... Oh, go ahead.
No, after you.
I was going to say, before we pivot to how to raise a child that you're interested in becoming a STEM professional, which I think we have, in the last 6 months of working together on this project with our children, we have some insight into, and in particular, how to do things like bypass the BS kind of introductory, stuff that you can get past very early on. And this is risky for me, Eric, because I'm a public university professor, right? So part of my, my lucre comes from having students enroll for all 4 years. But if I can get them to bypass your son or your daughter to bypass 2 or 3 years, I'm all for it, and get straight to the good stuff, which is more fun, by the way, for me and you to teach. But I want to get back to geometric theories, because you were extremely, again, you had a great year. You played Old Town Road on your birthday at a little Nas X with.
Before we get to that, let me just.
Right, go ahead.
It's not really fair, though. I think that what's happening with Zev is that he more or less kicked us out and then invited us back in. He made a study of physics, what is taught to undergraduates. He realized that the same courses occur multiple times. He effectively came up with an entire plan to self-teach a physics major. And I would love to take credit for that, except I didn't do it. And I think you can take some credit for it, in part because you challenged him with something where you said, look, it's going to actually take more time and effort to train you than you're imagining. So this doesn't become a net positive. And he's like, hold my beer.
Yeah. Before you give me a homework assignment,
Well, and we were locked down during COVID to some extent. And he said, okay, what do you feel like if I take this summer and burn it on a physics major that doesn't exist? And I said, well, you've never taken calculus or linear algebra. How are you going to do that? He said, do you believe? And I said, okay, I'll try. So I still don't know how he somehow bootstrapped himself into seemingly having am I wrong about this? He seems to have more or less the knowledge of a physics major with some holes in it, but it's pretty much like quantum and classical electromagnetism. I think that it's a wonderful thing, because it's a huge shot across the bow about do we need to teach these courses multiple times?
Exactly.
Can we and furthermore, Brian, one of the things we've been discussing is the fact that you wait until your second year of graduate school, often, to take general relativity and quantum field theory, the two theories that sort of define everything, and they aren't even required of every experimentalist, which I had no idea.
Right.
Different universities have these different requirements. So in part, I think what Zev is doing is essential, in that if we need more time so that everybody learns general relativity and quantum field theory, we have to figure out how to compress the physics major so that you can do more quickly. And again, I think that he wanted to impress you that he didn't need to be a net drain on your time. And that also sort of inspired me with your son, that when your son gave an unbelievable math answer to a group theory problem without any equations or any symbols that we were able to serve up to him, just let's hit him with, Jeff Weeks' The Shape of Space, which is a wonderful book, which is really about higher topology. It's kind of an advanced concept beyond college for most people, but written in a way that's engaging for anyone to read. And so I think what we need to do is we need to use these channels that we have, in particular, to get more people from backgrounds. You and I come from Jewish backgrounds, which have a reverence for learning. If somebody's coming from a culture that maybe put a higher emphasis on the arts, sports, or something like that, we need to get this stuff so it's less painful, more fulfilling, and more exciting to the imagination, so that you don't happen to, need to be in this game. Because I certainly didn't come from an academic family.
I know that. I was just going to make the joke. You hear a lot of people talking about, well, I'm a first generation, college student, and I'm thinking like our kids are, they can't even be first generation professor, PhDs. Your kids have 2 Harvard PhD parents, and my kid has at least 1 PhD from an Ivy League school. But what do we say?
And schmata salesmen for grandparents, and so
that's true. And same with mine. Yeah, my mother didn't graduate from college until she graduated from Western Connecticut State at age 55 with a degree in social work. But my dad, of course, did. Now, I do want to say we did spend time with one of my best friends, the best man at my wedding, Stefan Alexander, jamming along with our kids and talking physics and drinking a little bit of wine. Let's be honest, okay? There's no harm in drinking that wine.
There's no harm.
We had some roti and Steph got some great delicacies, that he used to cook for me back when I was at Brown. But Stefan is a product of the public school system too, and you and I live in California, and the fact that we've had to go out of our way, to really craft a curriculum for our children, because the powers that be won't do it.
No, this is ridiculous.
And I've never been so disgusted with the leadership that we have. And I said to Stefan, look, you're Black. For those that don't know, Professor Stefan Alexander, he's the president of the National Society of Black Physicists, full professor at Brown University. He was the E.E. Just Professor, a Boucher Award. Hey, the guy's got all possible credentials that you could ever want. Okay. This man is a product of the public school system. He said, I would not be talking to you if I didn't have exposure to calculus. Like, we wouldn't have been friends. I mean, forget about he wouldn't be a professor. Like, he wouldn't be in my life.
Brian, this is just stupid. And it's important that, it's important that we learn to say no to people with bad ideas, no matter what color skin or what their sexual orientation. If you've got a bad idea, I don't care if you're Jewish, Muslim, Christian, atheist, you've got a bad idea. And the idea, for example, of getting rid of standardized testing in California is completely insane. This idea that math is discriminating. It's also, I'm just going to be very blunt about it, it's also extremely bigoted.
Yeah.
How many of our friends who are all for this kind of this nonsense secretly believe that Black kids can't do math? And it's offensive to me. It's like, you know what? They're going to be just fine. Let us at them.
Absolutely.
And get out of the effing way. This is just stupid. You're not going to take the entire and this claim that math is biased against people of color. Have you taken a look at our winning math Olympiad team? There's one white guy on it.
Wow, but then they'll say, "Oh, those are Asian Americans. Those are,
You know what? I don't have time for stupid. Let's talk about smart.
No, the thing I like to point out is if you go to Nigeria, which is one of the most advanced technological civilizations on Earth, and just they don't teach 2 + 2 = anything other than 4 in any other top university. So let's stop saying it's white supremacy. I can't countenance that.
Well, please let me know how alternate mathematics works on your tax return. Let's just, you know what? We take these people too seriously.
All right, so let's go positive then. Let's talk about specifically what we are trying to do with our kids. And I think a lot of it comes down to time. And this pandemic has been a great challenge. It's been hard, being around, a bunch of kids all day long and then having to teach another bunch of kids, other people's kids, and doing all and dealing with COVID tests every single, afternoon. It seems like there's a COVID test to take care of. And I just thought about it, but when are we ever going to get this time back? This is a gift. I wouldn't probably have had time to spend, with my kids, let alone your kids, in the sense that we have now. And we've kind of developed a little, and it's an experiment. And I always say, people are like, we're experimenting with our kids. Well, I'm an experimental physicist, so F off if you don't like experiment. I'm not.
I've experimented on my kids since the day they were born. For sure.
And what else do we have? I mean, they're going to blame us no matter what. So we might as well have some fun with them. And I think the most fun thing that you can do is but by the way, for those of you out there, neither one of us is pushing either one of our children to follow in our footsteps. And in that sense,
I don't want them to.
Right. It's much more durable if they don't. And to see
but that's not the issue, Brian. The issue is that they want to know what are the coolest things in the world. Well, it's not a career decision. Mm-hmm. The ability to talk to a 16-year-old kid who has more or less a bachelor's degree's worth of knowledge of physics.
Yeah.
And to have him correct me, and I I didn't come to physics through that route. I went through a totally different channel. It's a wonderful thing to view it as culture. And, just because you played the oboe doesn't mean that you become an oboe player. It should be the case that you can learn quantum field theory and general relativity and differential topology without having to make those your career. And we don't have an idea that that's possible, because we make it so difficult that by the time you're done, you want a career and you need a career, and it wouldn't be fair to you not to have a career. And I think that in some sense, that's part of the problem is that we need to make this much more simple to explore the most beautiful ideas in the world. And, it's also a great comeback to that whole Feynman thing about, if you can't understand it, it's because the person explaining didn't make it make sense.
Right. I don't understand it.
Well, but they couldn't understand it. It's wonderful watching the fact that this stuff is understandable, and watching the fact that it trips people up in exactly the same places. For example, you might say that there's a Hilbert space of states, and that the points in the Hilbert space are the states of the system.
Right.
And that's not true, because there's an issue of a projective Hilbert space, or maybe it's not really a Hilbert space. Maybe it's a rigged Hilbert space. There are all sorts of ways in which we just go quickly over things where we're slightly lying. And it's been really interesting watching the 16-year-old figure out that there are a bunch of lies that are told as as scaffolding, and then the lies are removed later. It's crazy that we teach chemistry before quantum field theory, because it's dependent on quantum field theory. And so, in a weird way, I think I'm getting a lot out of this time watching my child teach himself, which is not the same thing as teaching my child or teaching your child. My plan for your child was to buy the book and to have Isaac teach himself the subject, with me getting him out of the ditch whenever he gets into trouble. But it's really the old Kung Fu Panda point, that the turtle teaches the panda. It's not Shifu who teaches the panda. It's the turtle. And they only have 2 conversations in the entire film.
But it also underscores this need. I had a conversation. I was honored to be on Tom Bilyeu and his podcast recently, and he's very much hoping you'll go back on his show. And he and I chatted a lot, and he doesn't have children. And he made that an intentional decision, he and his wife, Lisa, that they weren't going to have kids, and that this is something they didn't want quite frankly, a slight burden and so forth. And I said, well, I didn't get on my high horse about it. But I said, because there are people that can have kids, and it's for us to say, well, you could only make an impact if you do, kind of teach your own kids. And so, but I said, look, Tom, you can be an ideological parent just as much as a biological parent. And I don't think particular importance should be paid to like who produced the sperm or the egg that produced a certain kid. He asked me like, well, don't you feel closer to a biological kid than some kid you adopt? I said, Tom, God forbid, it happens that a parent is told, let's say someone comes to you, Eric, and says, Zev, he kind of looks like you, but he was actually we was mixed up at birth in the hospital. We accidentally mixed him up, and he's not your kid.
This happened to a friend of mine.
No way.
And he had 5 kids.
No way.
And it wasn't a question of a mix up in the hospital, but another less fortunate situation. And the child that he's closest to isn't his.
Yeah.
And but again, Tom Bilyeu is doing great things in terms of giving
I didn't finish.
No, of course. I know all the usuals. I am disturbed about the antinatalism. I think it's very important that we try to recognize that there's a reason that we have our own biological children. But when that doesn't work out, there are a whole panoply of options, including mixing, sometimes a mixed family with adopted kids and not or taking on other people's children and pouring your wisdom into them. Our friend Melanie Notkin has talked about. We have to talk about something which is uncomfortable, which is that there are preferred states of the system, but there are lots of situations in which you get into a non-preferred state, and it can be as deeply fulfilling or more fulfilling. And for some reason, the nuance isn't present to talk about that. But in general, I think both of us agree, have babies. I will point out that the whole demographic transition from high numbers of children to lower numbers of children has been an incremental version of antinatalism. As you give people opportunity costs, particularly women, they tend to have fewer children. Now, also, of course, as more children survive, they tend to stop having many children, expecting that some of them won't make it. That's right. But to to get back to it and sum it up, yes, I think that this time of COVID has been huge. If you've used it to try to not only teach your children, but have your children have the freedom to teach themselves while you're at home, and to just watch the process and try not to interfere too much.
Yeah, and just to close out that little vignette with respect to Tom, I did say to him that I found it very, very interesting that he has, made a commitment, and his decision to not have kids can only be verified by him to have been a bad one on his deathbed. And he admits that. If I regret it on my deathbed, then I know it'll be a bad decision. I said,
he'll never know.
He'll never know. And but
we'll never know.
But there's a side benefit, which is that I think we can know. And one of the ways that we can know is that we can know that being an ideological father or mother is impactful. And I think that comes down to our kids. Like, our kids might listen more, like Zev might listen more to me about certain things and about academia, or maybe in an experimental physics sense. And they're just lacunae that you and I have in our parenting and knowledge base that they can be fulfilled by the other. Yeah. And I think that's so powerful that my son will like, oh, Eric told me to do this. Like I'm wondering, Eric, can you tell him to clean up his room tonight and put away? Because he's going to listen to you. He may not listen to me. But that is a very, very powerful observation. I think that I'm seeing that sometimes you need, as Hillary Clinton, once said, it takes a village. I say it takes a multiverse. And to have an input, it just shows you the benefit that you may not be this person's father or mother, but you can impact them in a way that maybe their own biological parent couldn't have influenced them.
To an extent, Brian, we do need uncles and aunts and all that kind of stuff. I think Melanie and Jordan Peterson, trying to fulfill that's really important. But I also think that, we're also dancing around things that aren't true, that sound good. I mean, I think the fact is that I've watched your 5 kids listen to you because you put in the time and you build credibility and the way in which you parent. And, I do think that in part we've gotten into this lazy thing about teenagers. They always rebel. None of this stuff is really true. I think the point is, if you have really good, strong families, kids figure out that they have to both disambiguate. Well, they're going to have to figure out the difference between what they believe and what you believe and what's right for them and their time versus your time.
Sure.
But I also think that, quite honestly, families are super important. And we in the United States made a huge mistake by thinking we could rely on the market to take over many of the basic features of family life. And I think we're being taught a lesson that as children come home to live, that's not failure and that's not weird. It's the fact that families are an important auxiliary with respect to markets. Markets fluctuate, and there are problems and there are wars. And it's important that some portions of your family are strong enough to take in the weaker portions during tough times and help people out. And I think that these are starting to be real tough times. I think they can get a lot tougher than this. And I think we should be making a much larger bet on families and a smaller bet on the market as fewer and fewer people. I mean, Tom Bilyeu has been able to get the market to work for him, but most of us can't get the market to work for us at the same extent. And I think it's really important to recognize that I don't want to pretend that Zev doesn't listen to me or Isaac doesn't listen to you. They're really listening, and we've got to set an example. And it's tough because in some ways, I don't think we've ever been told that we're the adults. And so in some sense, you kind of look around the room and you say, wait, me? No, it's time to lead.
And each of us with different, kind of gaps in our own father's upbringing. But I do want to point out one market force that's really troubling along the antinatalism, and then we'll move on. But there was a tweet over the summer by this mathematician, John Carlos Baez, who's at UC Riverside, famous guy, brilliant guy. And he was saying, like, I'm going to spend most of my time thinking about, like, climate change. And so here's a talk I gave about climate change. And in the talk, he talks about all the things you can do to stem your carbon footprint. Okay, this is cool. Let me listen to it. He's a bright guy. And he goes through the mathematics of it, and it comes out with, don't eat meat. Maybe, I can cut back on a couple of kielbasa's every now and then, but it'll be tough, but maybe for the planet, I'll do it. Don't take so many airline trips, especially to conferences. Well, check plus. I haven't been to, very many conferences lately. They've all been over Zoom. And I don't know if that's a particularly good thing or bad thing. We'll talk about that some other time. And then another thing is, like, don't have kids or adopt. And that was the last thing. And I was like, excuse me? And it's more than just like a factor of 5. It might be even 10 times more impactful if you don't have a kid, according to John, than if you do, than if you cut out meat and driving cars and going to conferences. So I was like, well, isn't that logical extrapolation that nobody should have kids, and or maybe we should commit suicide, John? I think that's so fatalistic, and that's so it's so depressing to me, Eric, that a scientific mind as great as his would fundamentally, I mean, what if not just the next Zeb Weinstein? There are people that aren't born. There are many millions of people that aren't born. So are we going to stem the possible contributions to getting off of this planet or bettering this planet or healing the carbon crisis itself by not having kids? What kind of advice is this?
I have a hard enough time with self-hating Jews. Self-hating humans is a bridge too far. I think I can't do it,
especially
Brian.
Mathematicians.
Can we get on to another topic?
Okay, let's go on to another
I don't
topic.
want to talk about nihilism.
I want to talk about what I call the Assayer project, which is a schema for me, hopefully with help from folks like you and Luis Alvarez-Gaume at SUNY Stony Brook, Stefan Alexander, and hopefully folks like Paul Steinhardt, although I haven't asked him yet. But we're going to do like a Shelter Island 3. We're going to recreate these famous conferences that really set the stage for the future of experimental and theoretical physics, going from the 1940s and 50s to the 80s. I think the last one was sometime in the 1980s. And we're actually going to do it at the Ram's Head Inn and Shelter Island at some point. Okay, so stay tuned for that if these are the kinds of things that turn you on. But I've been noticing an asymmetry that certainly your theory of geometric unity is controversial. It's gotten, flack and so forth, and we're not going to get into that necessarily. But I haven't noticed a symmetric property wherein people, to the extent that they'll criticize Witten because they'll know that he's not going to listen or doesn't even know who they are, if, Sabina or me, or you, quite frankly, if we start, skewering him for now adopting the anthropic principle and the multiverse and the landscape, that's one thing. But other theories of everything, for example, Peter Woit, who you're friendly with. I know Stefan is friendly with. He's given a lecture at Brown University at Stefan's invitation about his new theory, and I just thought it was particularly touching to me that you had the as we say, the Menschlichkeit. You were a Mensch. You went through his theory, which you don't necessarily think is ultimately going to prevail or be correct, and might have some flaws that we can get into.
Good idea.
It's a good idea, but it's more important. The meta idea is that he has the idea and that you're taking it seriously. And I noticed that you're going to be doing this thing with Brian Greene and Sabina and Michael Shermer for some reason, our mutual friend. But talking about theories of everything. And I made a joke. I think we should give a Nobel Prize to the person who doesn't come up with a theory of everything. But you
should say what that's a reference to.
Yeah,
that's a reference to the hadronic resonances of the 1950s and 60s, where somebody said we should give a Nobel Prize to the person who doesn't find any
Come on, I
particle.
was trying to steal a joke. Come on,
All right.
Give me a break. We're amongst friends here.
Sorry. Go on.
In Judaism, that's actually a great sin. If you say like, I'm going to steal that line, that's called Genevas das.
No. I was supplying the reference to show what an erudite.
I know. Yes,
right.
Exactly. Okay.
Right.
So what do you make of this asymmetry that people like our friend Sabina or others will say, I don't have the time, to even learn about Weinstein or Wolfram or Garrett Lisi or now Peter Woit, a lot of W's in there, by the way. But she'll make a music video about it. I love you, Sabina. But she has time. It takes a lot of time to do this stuff. But I want to ask you, what do you make of this lack of, and even Peter Woit on Lex Friedman's podcast not too long ago when he was down there in Austin, Texas. Shout out to Lex. He might be listening. And I was honored to go on the show, and hopefully that'll air in the near new year. But with Lex, Lex asked him point blank, like, what do you think of Eric's theory? And he's like, I don't know enough about it. And it was kind of the standard BS. I'm sorry. I'm a little sick of people saying they don't have the time for stuff. I, as an experimentalist, made a joke that my theorist friends in the 5th floor of Mayer Hall didn't find very funny, but I was like, you could tell that the pandemic's coming to an end. This is before Omicron, because the theorists are back, their theorist offices are back to the usual state of solitude and emptiness. Meaning that, they kind of do things, but we experimentalists, we have to come up with payroll, and I have a $500,000 a month payroll I have to come up
You have
with.
a job.
Yeah, and I have my friend Lee Cronin is in the audience. He has the same kind of payroll. We're experimentalists. We're building stuff. We're going to Chile. We're going to Germany. We're going to raise funds and NSF and Washington, D.C. Yeah. I said, if you don't have time, like, who's going to have time?
But Brian, it's not real.
What is
you
it?
know that it's not real.
All right, well, tell me what it is.
Well, it's that this is super uncomfortable. I don't like being the person who's both explaining what's going on and the person putting forward the theory. It's not fun.
Let's ignore GU and just say, generally speaking, why doesn't Sabina look at Peter Woit's theory?
Well, in general, the idea is that it takes on some responsibility, that as you take on a theory and you start to look at it and try to understand what the person is doing, you might have to acknowledge, oh, that's a cool point. That's new. That's interesting. Or I don't understand this, or I don't know whether it solves the problem that the person is claiming or seems to be claiming. Mm-hmm. And so in part, everybody's guarding their reputations or they're attacking people's reputations. And I think it's really important to notice that the whole point of academics was to get people beyond this. Can't we give you a credential and vet you enough that we can trust you? And the situation with respect to, let's say, Peter Woit's theory, right? Peter Woit has a really interesting idea. He didn't say it this way, but he said, the strong force has a collection of symmetries that looks very, very strange. The weak force and the electromagnetic force have symmetries that are commonly found in all sorts of systems. But the strong force has this set of symmetries called SU3. Let's make that the centerpiece of a theory. Mm-hmm. And what we'll do is we'll take that and we'll stick it inside of something called U4, and we'll quotient U4 by U3. We'll get the strong force out automatically. And then there'll be a version of space-time with 4 spatial dimensions and 0 temporal dimensions, and one with 1 time dimension and 3 space dimensions. We've had this puzzle about Wick rotation from one into the other. We'll use the fact that the SO4 part that looks like 4 space-time dimensions has an asymmetry between its left and its right factors. He does a lot of interesting stuff to come up with a suggestive stylistic picture for why the world is in part the way it is. And he doesn't go on to claim that he's got 3 generations in the model of matter. But the point is, it takes, I don't know, an hour and a half to sort of really grok not only what he's doing, but why he's doing it. And now I'm
an hour and a half. Sorry, I didn't know it was an hour and a half. Sorry, I retract my concerns.
Well, you can do it a lot faster if you wanted just a cursory overview, right? But yeah, in part, the real thing that nobody's saying is we don't take any of these people seriously. If you're claiming that you're making progress, you're lying. And in fact,
we would never do this in experiment. We would never do this in experiment.
Oh, well, I understand, but things have gone insane.
Why is that, though, Eric? Is it because we secretly value theoretical physicists more than experimental physicists?
Well, sure. There's a way in which we value theoretical physics when it works more than we value generic experimental physics when it works.
Who would you rather have on your interplanetary rocket ship, a theorist or an experimentalist?
Well, first of all, we haven't always had to choose. We've had Enrico Fermi's in our midst, right? So
that's true.
One, I don't want one more version of Bloods versus Crips, right? They're all welcome at my Shabbat.
West Coast here. I'm throwing up the shin symbol.
What? Is that right? Is that a gang sign?
The Shin
now?
Gang, yeah, the most feared gang on it. Okay, go ahead.
But that's not really what's happening. What's happened is that we've stopped believing in ourselves. We don't believe that there will be an Einstein in a post office. We don't believe that there will be a Galileo threatened by a pope. We're sort of reenacting all of these things as theater. And I think what you see that's really disturbing to me is that I don't care for Stephen Wolfram's approach, but I'm certainly glad he's doing it. And I'm glad that somebody is saying, let's take the discrete more seriously than we take the continuum. I mean, the continuum to me is the salient clue in many ways, but the fact is somebody should take the other bet. Mm-hmm. Somebody should say, well, maybe the universe is more like a computer, not just to get money out of Silicon Valley, but, because in fact, information is a different basis than we've had previously for trying to understand the physical world. And what I don't understand is by stepping out of the academic, I can say I'm a podcast host. I'm a mathematician. I wasn't even trained as a physicist.
You're
I
an
wasn't even
MD.
really trained as whatever. I'm an MD at Teal Capital. What's really happening is that you guys, in theory, don't believe in each other, and you're trying to take each other out. Anybody who's doing an isolated thing like Wolfram or Woit or myself or Julian Barbour or Garrett Lisi or whoever, I can find things like, Garrett and I have talked for ages about his theory. I don't believe in it. It's not dumb on a bunch of different levels. I don't think it hangs together, but the fact is that.
But your criticism of him is an act of love. It is an act of love that you're going to take him seriously and you're going to actually confront.
No, but it's not just an act of love. And it's like, the reason I tear you apart is because I love you so much.
That's why you beat me. But
no, I'm so freaking sick of all of these stupid Twitter answers. It's like anything that sounds like sophisticated on Twitter usually fails in real life. I like Garrett a lot, and I've got a lot of love for him as a human being, and we've hung out a lot. I don't think his theory works. It doesn't mean that it can't work one day, or he can't remove some of these issues, but I think that stylistically, it's got tons to recommend it over one more drone looking at Calabi-Yau manifolds as part of a string theory program, or, yet the 12 millionth paper on Ashtekar variables, in a new light. And so in part, and I think, we actually have to note that Sabina in her older incarnation was positive about the fact that people were spreading out. I don't know what's happened to Sabina recently. I'm very disturbed by some of the stuff that I'm seeing, but she's historically been that in some sense, it appears to be much more reflexive and sweeping. And I think that, in part, she was much more cautious, more careful, more subtle, more nuanced. And it's become kind of the, oh, please, model. And I think that the first version of Sabina was doing a tremendous favor to the field that the field did not repay. And I think that there got to be some bad blood. And I watch as people sort of go into these intellectual smaller worlds because some bad thing happens to them and they overreact. I think it's really important to recognize that we needed to give Sabina more love when she was the conscience of the community and she was saying things that we didn't want to hear. And then it's gradually, and gradually it's going to become, why should we spend money on accelerators? Or why are the theories of everything? Or why is it always men who are pestering me with their grand dreams? And, this is stupid. It's not at the same level as the rest of Sabina's critique. And in part, what I'm looking to do is to say, I looked at Peter Woit's theory because I believe in my own. And I looked at Garrett's because I believe in my own. And it's not, my belief in my own theory isn't, I don't need it for a meaningful life. It's a guess. It's a shot on goal. And all of these things are not true. Some of them might have some salvageable parts, but in general, these attempts to guess what the fundamental structure is are not being listened to by anyone. Like I will claim that Peter Woit, likely nobody on planet Earth almost, is really reading it, taking it seriously, and thinking about it. And the same thing is true with Garrett, and the same thing is true with Stephen Wolfram and Julian Barbour. Maybe in Wolfram's case, because there's money there's a little bit more. And I've learned that, okay, this thing about trying to signal that it's not all about money doesn't actually work in a world that believes that everything is about money. So it may be that I have that wrong as well. But I do believe that what we're seeing is that people aren't trying to take these things seriously in a positive idiom. The only thing people are doing is they're saying, well, maybe Jacques Distler and Garibaldi can take out Garrett Lisi. It's like the kill shot. And I think that the kill shot is killing interesting science. Why are you looking to dispose of people? In combat, we refer to this as pink mist. Oh, you got dragged, you got owned. The pawnage is extreme. We need to get these people out of the academy and out of the sciences. I should say that I once watched somebody destroy his career over lunch by coming into the MIT cafeteria and bad-mouthing a professor named Arthur Maddock, who I believe is now gone. And I was very close with a very senior member of that department. And without getting into the details, maybe I'll do it later when I feel more ready to. He told me that it was not worth it to have a rotten colleague spewing bile in a department because it was going to have the effect of taking down the entire department to allow that kind of poison at MIT mathematics. And I think that it's a really interesting cautionary tale that the old guard understood that collegiality was a resource needed to do research. If you don't have collegiality, if you go for these kill shots, you're not going to get anything done because there's a level of trust. If you think about the RNA tie club, where you had mostly physicists trying to figure out the structure of the genetic code, which they failed to do. Marshall Nirenberg eventually did it. But you had all these great names like Teller and Feynman and Gamow and Watson and Crick, of course, being trained as a physicist. And they shared their ideas because they knew there was enough for everyone. And like, I don't know, more than half of them, I think, ended up with medallions to show for it. And I think it's really important that we drive the anti-collegial out of the field and let them know that they can do something else with their lives. They can become tabloid journalists. They can become, professional snark podcasters or something. But I think it's really important to recognize that we have to read each other's research with a different eye. And I do think that somebody like Peter Woit needs to be taken seriously. And I'm super disappointed that he fell back on something that he's got my number. He has an idea of what I work on. He doesn't want the responsibility of saying, oh, I think Eric's onto something, or I think Eric's full of it.
Right.
And I think in the last year, or at least since April 1st, 2021, I haven't had a single physicist talk to me about my reasons for believing in 3 generations, that there are only 2 and there's a third imposter generation. You can just break that out of GU and say, we have this puzzle why there are 3 copies of matter, and you've given an explanation. Let's talk about it. So what I can tell you is, it's not that we're not interested in. We've come to understand that taking an interest in the physical world as a theory, as a pursuit, is too dangerous to your reputation. You spend all this time accumulating a reputation, and then you're given the opportunity to try to add new ideas. And mostly what you're going to have is the possibility of immolating yourself if you do anything original. And this is crazy. And I think what we have to recognize is that we have to restore collegiality by being minorly anti-collegial to the really anti-collegial among us. And we need to show them the exit, and we need to, give them, a few days worth of food before we put them on the ice floe. But ultimately, they don't belong in our subject because they're too costly and they don't contribute enough.
When I look at how many people are, coming up with purported solutions, it can't evade my notice that pretty much all of you folks who are engaged in this are not
you people.
So my best friends are but you don't have academic freedom. You're not tenured. In other words, the people that have the least
academic freedom.
Yeah, but I'm saying like freedom. Peter is not an academic. He's not a tenured professor. Sabine is not a tenured professor.
Why is Peter not an academician?
What? No, let me finish. What I'm saying is the people that have the freedom to investigate these things, the Wittens, et cetera, the ultimate, are not investigating it, and the people that don't have permanent positions, shall we say, in the academia setting, such as you, Peter. Peter's he's a lecturer. He's an affiliated research, but he's not a tenured professor as far as I understand.
He also runs the IT system for Columbia's mathematics department.
That's great. I'm just saying he's not a tenured professor. There's a difference between tenured.
But we have
I'm not saying better or worse. I'm just saying Garrett. Let's take Garrett. Garrett's not a tenured professor, right? But all you guys who actually have a lot at risk. In other words, you're not fully backed by tenure, as am I or Ed Witten. And I'm not comparing myself, but just to say that you would expect the reverse. The people that have this freedom to take it. And I've often thought that, in physics, it's a deep question. Should we really have tenure for physicists? I mean, it's very different than, a journalist or something. And I'm not even saying that we should have it, I certainly don't think we should have it in our public.
No, we should fix tenure. Meaningful tenure was taken away from you guys in 1953 by the Association of American Universities, the AAU, when they backed away from their communist professors, or anyone claimed to be a communist professor, saying communists did not deserve academic protection.
Right.
Right. So basically, the universities caved to Joe McCarthy in 1953. And then you guys have been not very good at getting enough funding, getting enough insulation to defend the universities. And quite honestly, I'm furious with the professor, not you in particular, because you're bold enough to have me on, which is a huge thing. But the real problem is the number of I was just in the physics department at the University of Chicago, and I was talking to some of the senior people, and they said, "Oh, diversity, equity, and inclusion is like a tax." And I was thinking, well, why don't you speak out against it if you don't believe it? It's like, oh, because it's too expensive not to pay the tax. I said, well, then it's a protection racket, right? If you can't speak out as a professor, then you've failed, and you've failed to protect the universities as the citadel in which we hope to have our sense-making apparatus. So partially, I'm furious that people haven't followed the Serge Langs of Yale University. These people cared, and they would tell you to go screw off if you came after professors. And just, the story that I was telling about the senior mathematician who said we will not have a member of our faculty who goes after other members of our faculty and spreads bile and poison. The system has to be defended. So my question is, what is Ed Witten doing to defend the system from, let's say, a colleague he deeply disagrees with? Is he speaking out, or is he quiet? I hear people speaking out in safe ways. You can badmouth Israel for sure. That's a safe way to speak out. But I don't know that you can easily, really talk about what's going on in the field. And so the way I look at it is that the AAU started this problem. The professors have become weak. We had champions like Serge Lang. We haven't replaced them. It's important, for example, to realize why the eulogy for Abdus Salam was written in Arabic by Yuval Ne'eman, who's a right-wing Israeli physicist and politician. It's because there was a sense in which we were all above these things. That collegiality was a force to be reckoned with. You could beat the crap out of someone with collegiality, like ending a tenure bid if you were anti-collegial. And what I see is that we've abandoned our culture. We don't know, as Judaism has a strong prohibition against gossip.
Yep.
It's like blow on a dandelion. Now, please, go gather the seeds. We don't defend our culture. And so we're not our culture anymore. We're not the culture of Dirac or of Einstein or of Schwinger.
Do you think that's a reflection of the broader political polarization? I mean, I was listening to, I think on Lex's show with Tim Dillon. I know he's maybe not a good
He's a friend of mine.
Yeah, okay, good. So I don't know your nature. Anyway, and
he makes jokes that other people latch onto, and I have to deal with the problem that he's like, I don't understand. I made a joke.
I'm a comedian.
Yes, you make a joke, but then what happens is that the jokes become harassment by a bunch of people who aren't really very funny. But Tim, right. I don't know that I have a problem with Tim.
Okay. So anyway, I think to Lex, he said something, like in 2000, the 2000 election, when there was this contested battle between Gore and Bush, I remember coming into work and my boss, my late boss, terribly, Andrew Lang, said, I'm just checking to see if we have a country left anymore. And like the exact same words were said, like right after the 2020 election, but it was like serious. Like, I don't know if we have a country anymore. Like how much has changed in society over 20 years is just insane. And I wonder, like, I've noticed it in collegiality too. When I started graduate school in the 90s, it was normal. Like it did feel like everything was open. It was just after Kobe discovered the fossil imprint of the anisotropy in the microwave background that was crying out for an explanation.
This is Kobe Bryant, the famous basketball player.
Rest in peace. Rest in peace. No, this is COBE.
You got to say these things.
Come on, you're proving that you're a youngster. You're a Gen Q or
anyway,
you're Gen Iota. Anyway, the point being that we have this society that is ridden with hostility, with like these kill shots, these pawnings, and so. But it's in the political realm, and like January 6th, or the country was almost over, and we're ended, and democracy died, and dark, and blah, blah, and like the stakes seem so high. And then the joke in academia used to be like the fights are so intense because the stakes are so low.
Yeah, but that was always a wrong statement.
I think it's wrong too, because the stakes at a meta level couldn't be higher if we lose the educational system. So I want to talk to you about another idea that I've been kind of kicking around in my mind, has to do with blockchain. And I want to just tell people Eric's wallet address are the middle 20 digits of pi. So if you want to make him a deposit, he's open. Just the middle digits of pi, Eric. Okay, he's not laughing. Anyway, the point being, what are the opportunities for, let's say, and I saw a tweet by Andrew Huberman over the summer, something like, oh, look, get ready for the next thing in science. It's going to be like, look down my microscope and get my NFT, and that's the next big thing in science to fund private research and even public research. I found that horrifying. Like, in a sense that, first of all, we've already paid a tremendous amount to the U.S. government, those of us who pay taxes, for these discoveries and for the laboratories and for the training of the scientists.
Well, Brian, yeah, burn it all down is coming.
Yeah. What? Excuse
Burn
me?
it all. When people will not defend the universities, they will not defend our public schools. There's no moment where somebody in a position of authority says enough. The New York Times is not meant to be a propaganda instrument. The universities are not meant to be indoctrination camps. Science is not meant to be a postmodernist free-for-all. There is a concept of mustn't. There are things you mustn't do. You're permitted to do them. They're not necessarily illegal. And it's not a question that you shouldn't do it. Like, all things being equal, I wouldn't do that if I were you. They're just things that you mustn't do. So the most frequent example I give is, you should be allowed to burn the flag and you must not burn the flag. It's not really, well, aren't I free to burn it? Yep. If I call it self-expression, are you telling me I can't? Yeah, you can, but you mustn't. Well, where does this mustn't come from? It's kind of a first principles thing. It's part of our culture. It's part of the oral Torah. If we don't start exercising adulthood in terms of a culture, in terms of getting rid of these problems, people are taking away a very different message, which is that every institution is over, that everyone all there is money. There is no concept of a compact or an agreement or an understanding that isn't enforceable. A lot of what's going on with the blockchain is people talking about, how do you deal with zero trust? So right now, what we keep wanting to show is that everyone is bankrupt. Brian, you just love money. You went into physics for the money. It's like, I don't even know what to make of these things.
No, podcasting. I went into the podcasting for the likes and the followers.
I just had somebody today from Google tell me, read the room, Eric. Nobody wants to talk about UFOs. We're locked down with Omicron. And like, everybody says, actually, that's exactly what I want to talk about. We've got this deranged set of easy answers, and those of us who believe in nuance and intelligent civic life have to stand up and say, we're not doing this anymore. We need to create an expectation that you can sit down at a dinner without having somebody pee in your food or throw a pie in your face or try to steal your wallet. And like what we were talking about, the entire University of California system has gotten rid of standardized testing. Well, let me just say something about that. As a dyslexic, as a learning disabled guy, if you want to use that language, that was my only ticket to college. I couldn't prove that I had a brain in my head using grades. My executive functioning wasn't there. I don't even know if we used words like that when I was in high school. So what you just did is you just took away the dreams of a bunch of people who were not doing very well in high school, but had one way of demonstrating that maybe there were something called teaching disabilities.
Right.
And okay, so now you just took the entire University of California. Why? Well, because people of color aren't good at math. Bullshit. Not only are Asians good at math, I think Black kids can be good at math too.
Yeah. The
whole thing is so confused. And where were we? When did we stand up en masse and say, over my dead body, you morons, get the educators out of education? We've got a serious problem. There's way too much ideology. I think that the problem, Brian, is that nobody believes in tenure because nobody's exercising tenure almost. We had this guy Abbott invited from University of Chicago to MIT, right. And then he's uninvited. Well, more or less, we've got to start shutting down universities that aren't universities. And if our universities are not going to be universities, if they're not going to be citadels of learning, if they're going to be all about babying wrong ideas because we're all terrified that we're going to get called a bigot, a misogynist, transphobic, Islamophobic, et cetera, et cetera. It would be better that we not have these structures. Now, when it comes to this issue of NFTs, yes, we had a great situation in which the federal government effectively paid for universities through overhead. It was a very complicated, cryptic system that was worked out, that wasn't open, wasn't honest, but it worked at a certain level. And we had tenure, and we had an ability for people to earn a living and survive. Now everybody is terrified that they're going to be disinvited, deplatformed. They're going to lose their grants. They got to submit things into this weird peer review black box. And the whole thing is unconscionable. So my feeling is we need to get the best parts of the university system out and off of the Titanic before it sinks. So Titanic University is going to go under based on the poisoning of academic life. And it's important to recognize that universities contain some things that aren't done anywhere else in our civilization, except for maybe a few institutes like Perimeter or the Institute for Advanced Study. We've got to go rescue the best stuff before the Taliban take over the art museum and start smashing idols, which are our statues. We saw this in Iraq with ISIS. It literally happened. We saw it with the Bamiyan Buddhas in Afghanistan.
Do you think this is coming from without to destroy the American academic system from within?
We are executing a self-extinguishing program. This is like antinatalism at the level of a country. We're not going to have something to pass that's worth passing to our children. There may still be a country. It may still have a Department of Motor Vehicles. But what this country is supposed to do is to rid itself, in some sense, progressively of its baby fat over decades and decades, and become the thing that it was always imagined to be. It didn't start off as a particularly just place. I actually have some sympathies with the idea of saying, let's look at the 1619 as an important date in American history. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we forgot. But I think one of the things that was really important is that we forgot how this country has progressed and how it's gotten rid of its own demons, immorality, progressively
almost
over time.
Uniquely. Yeah, almost uniquely amongst Western civil. I mean, fighting to end the Civil War, to end slavery.
I think Britain has gotten a lot kinder as it's gotten a lot less powerful.
Sure, that's a burden that we have, right? But let me pivot back to the original question, which had to do with opportunity. Because I don't, I see our mutual friend Lex is in the audience. He doesn't like it when we're too negative, right? So let me talk about opportunities going forward. 2022 is upon us in about a week. What are you looking forward to? And in particular, are there opportunities? For example, if there is a way in utilizing the blockchain or something like that, are there opportunities to benefit society? I hear a lot about Web3, and I made a joke that like Albert Einstein, I don't know with what weapons, World War III will be fought, but I know World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. And I said, I don't know with what technology
Web3 will be NFTs.
I said Web3. I don't know what Web3 will be built on, but Web4 will be built on AOL CDs and 25K DSL. Yeah. But in all seriousness, what opportunities can such a technology? It's obviously incredibly powerful.
Well, it's huge. Yeah, but we're going to go through a period right now where Jack is trying to focus us on Web 2, and Mark Andreessen is trying to focus us on Web 3. And part of the problem is that Web 2 and Web 3 both depend on profit to bootstrap themselves into existence. And then you have the Bitcoin versus non-Bitcoin version of crypto. Yeah. And I think that a lot of good can be done and a lot of harm will be done using the blockchain. I think making things immutable, trying to use math rather than violence. Eventually, math will come to resemble violence if you consider the state is a monopoly on violence, as per Weber's famous definition of what a government is. I think that in part you'll find people including things in the blockchain that we desperately want to remove, but we can't get rid of. We're headed into some very weird place where lots of good things are going to happen and lots of bad things are going to happen, and we're going to be spun and sold things. I saw Naval Ravikant ask the question, can you please explain Web3 is not a Ponzi scheme, because my mom is worried that that's what I'm getting involved with? And Naval said, oh, absolutely, it's a Ponzi scheme. But this time it's our Ponzi scheme. Every generation gets one, which I think is just some,
That's the American dream.
I don't know how to do. the problem is whatever is going to be making people money is going to have boasting rights until it fails. It's like when mortgage-backed securities took part in what was called the Great Moderation. We hailed Alan Greenspan as an oracle and as a deity, and where did that go? And that's what we're going to do right again with NFTs, with the blockchain. We're going to continue to build golden idols, and each calf is going to disappoint us if we don't see it for what it is. And I guess what my concern is that Bitcoin fixes this, or Bitcoin fixes everything, which is its more extreme version, is a really dangerous idea. And the same way, the NFTs are being sold in a cult-like fashion. This is normal, but it's also destructive. The railroads were probably sold as, oh my God, you're not going to believe it. We're going to be able to connect the coasts, and you'll be, at your cousins in California in days rather than weeks. Okay, fine. These things are needed to build the railroads. But then it always comes to pass that we come to see things in a different light. And if you're swept up in the NFT madness, if you're making a fortune, or if you're about to lose one, this is sort of one thing. I think that the thing that's concerning me is the extent to which people are saying, oh, your funding isn't working, move to the blockchain. So for example, I put a tip jar on my Twitter page because someone told me that micropayments were the future, and I didn't believe it. And so I've had it open for a few months, and I've made almost $30 with over 500,000 followers. And so I think that this is partially nonsense. And I think people should actually open their tip jars to figure out what their future is.
I actually had a tweet about, I said, well, which has made you more money? Has it been your Substack, your tip jar, your Clubhouse tipping, or something, or else, or your .eth domain? And basically, they all add up to about zero, except for the people that are running it, selling the ether domains. And I'm not against it. I think I look at these things, Eric, and I look at it as a positivist. I want to see it's cool, it's fun to do this. Look, I don't need to do podcast. I'm remunerated nicely by the state of California. It's fun for me to do it. I enjoy talking to people like you. I probably wouldn't have met you, by the way, if it wasn't. I met you a long time ago, thanks to Stefan. But we wouldn't have gotten kind of engagement that you and I have, and the fun that we have. I wouldn't really trade that for anything. And so,
but I would take it back into the Citadel if I could.
Okay, go ahead.
In other words, I'm on the web in part because it's an opportunity to disintermediate the gatekeepers. But you have to realize that it's a cesspool out here, or more.
It's a thankless.
Yeah. Maybe I'll say it differently. It's a bathroom in a gas station, and sometimes it's a little bit better maintained. Sometimes it isn't. When you gotta go, you gotta go. But it's not a place that you would want to hang out if you had other choices. And I believe that if our physics departments and our math departments, if our pedagogy, if our schools, if our civic and civil society was in better shape, the constant need to get around somebody's idiocy. I mean, you saw it with Joe Rogan interviewing Sanjay Gupta. It was just like trying to say, no, you guys lied that I was taking horse dewormer. It's like, well, perhaps that was a little snarky.
We didn't clarify it then. Hamana. Yeah, right.
It's just like, you mother Fs, cut the crap. You're just making everybody distrust everything. So when I claim they're coming to burn it all down, Brian, I'm quite serious about it. The younger people are watching us as adults, and they're saying, my God, why would anyone read a newspaper? Why would anyone join a political party? Why would anyone want to go to school? And I don't have great answers for them. I just think we should save what works from something that's sinking. And what I find fascinating is that no matter how much I talk about the need to insulate science with money and to make professors rich enough that they can afford not to go along with Anthony Fauci and Peter Daszak or Ed Witten, right? So we can get independent minds speaking up to get rid of this sort of sinking each other's theories, not because we're trying to actually make them better, but because it's just fun to be a dick. I don't hear anyone coming back from the world of people with money. And it's fascinating to me. It's like, I don't think one person with a 10-figure, 11 or 12-figure asset base
finds this interesting. It's not that they don't hear me. They very, very often clap me on the
that's
back.
not true. I mean, you personally met Chern-Simons this summer. He personally invited you out to Long Island to spend. I think he's very interested in, but he may be the exception.
He is, but he did ask me, do you have your own funding? I mean, it's just there's some point at which
I have to. Yeah.
We have stuff that's cheap, that's inexpensive. Like what theory is relative to what it takes to keep you, amused with your toys. Yeah. Theory is a tiny fraction of this.
That's true.
We aren't even immunizing journalists. Journalism is cheap. I'm not a journalist. I'm not advocating that we make journalists rich because I'm trying to get rich. Maybe I should become a journalist to become rich if that works. But we are not immunizing anyone. We more or less, the people with FU money have zipped their lips, or they're apologizing to China constantly. Or, we have people who have real courage, who are advertising things, or keeping a Substack, which is gated. I always find it funny when Twitter says to me, do you want to read the article first? And it's like, right. Well, there's a paywall on that article. I tried to read it.
And then it says, be careful. Things get heavy sometimes.
Like
but my mother. Yeah, exactly.
Don't you realize people are going to die if we don't do something? This is about, COVID. And you say, well, why don't we lift all the paywalls so we can read the articles?
Or is it okay to ask you about Jeffrey Epstein and the Maxwell trial?
Sure.
Okay. What do you make of that? First of all, I want to know it's unlike any trial I've ever witnessed. And I obviously haven't paid, the logarithm of as much attention and knowledge that you have, but walk us through what is going on there. It's excluded. There aren't even like court sketchers in the, what do you think is going on? Let me ask you a question. What do you think is going on? Why is the narrative being crafted as it is? Cui bono and quo vadis? What's going on here?
This is an interesting question. I don't think, that the fact that there's no video in the courtroom is interesting. Okay. That's normal. I think you see some very interesting, subtle stuff. One is that most of what I've been hearing about is Jeffrey Epstein's relationships with girls who are on the verge of becoming women. And that's important and it's interesting, but forgive me for saying so. If you take a relatively, experienced 17-year-old and a 12-year-old who maybe hasn't gone through puberty, and you say, well, those are the same thing because it's all children and something magically happens on an 18th birthday. I think you're not being honest about the horror. I feel like what we just had is we had a bunch of girls in high school who, he shouldn't have been doing anything with. I personally believe we can respect the 18 line without much of an issue. Right. But the issue isn't really pervy behavior about a rich guy with high school juniors and seniors. I've shown pictures of Jeffrey Epstein with like a 12-year-old on his lap. And I've noticed that in FBI footage of Jeffrey Epstein's Florida place, there are pictures, which are kind of hard to see on the walls, right, which have stuff at we're talking about a sick human being. And we are not talking about it in real terms because we're afraid, right? Like it's terrifying to say, oh, there's a big difference between a 12-year-old and a sexually adventurous 17-year-old. I know that'll be misconstrued, but honestly, we don't love our kids enough to say what's true. I don't think that we've gotten into the issue of how Jeffrey Epstein, like I tried to dig into how do we protect these people if they're part of CIA programs. We just had this release of information that people who have been in child sex crimes not being prosecuted by right. if they're members of the CIA. Mm-hmm. We have some sort of an informal structure that we need to blow up right now. I believe that this is about sources and methods. I believe that when the intelligence community says sources and methods, there is an agreement effectively with our prosecutors not to proceed. And my feeling is, no, you lost. You ran an enormous operation, almost certainly, that people could trip over. It was a bad operation. It was a dumb operation. It wasn't even ultimately an effective one because it wound up in the middle of the public square.
Right.
And right now you're intimidating all of us. And how are you doing it? Probably through privilege. My guess is that we should look at something called investigative privilege, like attorney-client privilege. How do you keep documents out of the public? I believe that we have various forms of privilege that are being used in an exotic fashion. I believe that we have something called an event deconfliction system. You should look up something called Case Explorer, I believe, or Safety Net. There are a bunch of these systems. I believe that this is what is called I've been told it's called a blue on blue incident, where local law enforcement trips over something at the federal level or that's protected. We had an AP reporter ask Alex Acosta what he meant by the fact that Epstein belonged to intelligence, and he gives this weird rambling answer that he clearly prepared. We have not seen the records from Villard House, which account for a hedge fund, which I claim never existed. I don't believe that when we say disgraced financier that we're telling the truth. I believe what you're watching is that somehow there has to be a system to keep the CIA and other agencies from being discovered by local law enforcement. And if they're undercover, if they're running a front company, whatever that system is showing you in real time how to do something in full view of everyone where not that much is occurring. I don't think that the prosecution was particularly spirited. I don't think that the allegations that really matter, which is this state protected, seem to be front and center. I don't really understand what the relationship between, you could make an argument that one member of the prosecution should have recused his or herself based on connections to the government that are in the family. I don't think that we've talked enough about 12-year-olds and very young people. And I think that you're watching a mopping up operation where the information that leaked into the public is being handled as what was at one time called a limited hangout. And my feeling is that this is probably the intelligence community screwing up in full view of the world. And we should recognize that when you screw up, you lose rights. We should probably take power away from the intelligence community, and whatever this agreement or understanding to use various forms of privilege to keep these things out of the courts. I actually subscribe to the idea that when it's working correctly, we should be doing this. But the problem that I'm having, and I'll be very clear about it, I don't think there is any reason ever for using a 12-year-old in a compromat operation, in a honeypot, as an intelligence gathering, as part of the intelligence world. And if we have to do things like that, I'd prefer that we not have countries and just call it a wrap on the human project. I think that what we're talking about is, I know that there is nothing that justifies this. I would prefer that the countries involved simply cease to exist if the only way they can exist is to use exotic sources and methods that have to be protected in this fashion that look like this. If 12-year-old girls are being endangered, let's just call the whole thing a wrap.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Before we wrap up, we have to wrap up in about 15 minutes. I'm being told by higher powers down here, and I know you've got things to get onto. I want to thank you so much for your time, but I have a couple more topics. Looks like
you want to talk about inflation?
I want to talk about inflation. I want to talk about COVID and Fauci and Collins, and I want to talk about what this year meant to you and highlights from this past year and what you're looking forward to in 2022. Sure. I want to end on a high note. Okay.
All right.
So, witnessing all the great stuff that you went through, and maybe we'll have to, defer some of those to the next quarter. Maybe we can have a dedicated talk about inflation and the economics lecture series that you gave in Chicago.
I'm just worried that the world is going to be subjected to something very brutal. And I really want to alert people, because I don't know when we're going to get to it, that the calculation and understanding of inflation does not belong to economists.
I've heard you say that. What does that mean? Is this Boskin's? What is this?
Well, let me just say this. I don't believe that virology belongs to virologists. Right now, I'm very often forced to wear a face mask, check myself constantly. My entire life has been disrupted by a virus. You let a virus get out of a lab potentially, then you lied about it potentially in the Lancet. You got multiple Nobel Prize winners to act as if we're all racist for asking the questions. F you, get out of the way. This virus belongs to us all, right? We have to recognize that it's not
And
your
possibly
domain.
suppress the vaccine for political reasons a month before the
Moral,
election.
I don't even want to get into it. It's ridiculous. The calculation of inflation does not belong to economists. There's nothing in it that if you have calculus and you have a certain amount of linear algebra, you can understand what it is. And right now, for example, the entire Bureau of Labor Statistics, I believe, has claimed that it's moved to a cost of living framework, which has to do with saying, I need to know how much you like coffee relative to tea so that I can figure out what your inflation is if coffee becomes more expensive.
And hedonics.
And then, well, that's different than hedonics.
No, I'm saying additionally.
Then they said, oh, we don't actually have to compute your tastes and your preferences because of work of a guy named Erwin Dewart or Dywart. And you look at his work, he's confused by the Bohm-Aronoff effect. In other words, he makes a statement. There's something called the Walsh multi-period circularity test, which is basically going around the Escher or Penrose stairs, right? And you can count that how many steps you go up. By the time you come back, you don't actually come back to the same level. This is known from physics. It's known from differential topology and differential geometry to be a real effect. And the person that we're betting our entire calculation of inflation on, in some sense, is a guy who doesn't understand that there's something called the Ambrose-Singer theorem, which states that you should not expect things to come back to normal once you've gone around a circle. You can look at this in terms of the quantum Hall effect or Berry's phase. We all get this. The economists are confused. And just the way, sometimes you need biologists to enter linguistics to figure out, well, which languages are really related to each other. We used to think that Turkish was related to Finnish. It turns out not to be, and you can use genetic analysis in part to sort this out.
Banda Turkum.
You're saying I am a Turk?
Yes, for my Turkish friends in the audience.
Yeah. Okay. Then you have a situation. I didn't understand why you were doing that. Then you have a situation, in which you have to enter a different field. The physicists had to enter molecular biology. Well, the economists have been entering all sorts of fields using what they call economic imperialism, which they've decided is a good thing. They say that we're the only science, we're mathematical, you can hold us up to scrutiny. Okay, I claim that you've bet the entire calculation of inflation on the work of a guy named Erwin Dewart, who does not understand that the Walsh multi-period circularity test is negated by something called Ambrose-Singer holonomy, right? We've got to get involved and take this stuff away from the economists until they actually understand what it is that they're doing, because what they're using this for is discretion. You can change the baskets of goods, you can change the formula that you're using to compute things with to get any value you want. You want to rotate energy and food in or out. You want to decide that maybe hedonic adjustments to quality are larger or smaller. The more discretion the economists have, the more we are in danger of having our rates of inflation dialed up and dialed down to values that are convenient. And particularly at a time when the money supply has expanded and exploded. By the way, interesting that we exploded the money supply just at the moment we changed the reporting for the series, so that if you mention that M1 has exploded, people who are trained in universities will say, oh, you can't go by that because they changed the series construction. Right. So whenever you're going to change something dramatically in real life, change the formula that you use to construct your series at the same moment. And all of the people with master's degrees will come to your defense that nothing can be said at all. It's just an amazing feat. Right now, we have the Fed commanding that money be printed. And we also have the Bureau of Labor Statistics with way too much freedom to report what the effect of that inflation is. And so my claim is that people like us have to get involved in this, and you have to be prepared to say to 1,000 economists, you're wrong, go read the Ambrose Singer theorem, you don't know what you're talking about.
So pivoting to a less controversial subject, COVID, loudly. So over the summer, I coined a term for you, a nickname, a nom de guerre, a nom de plume, that you're the atomic clock, that you are right more times a day than the atomic clock. Now, sometimes when we're on the basketball court, okay.
Clearly you haven't talked to my wife, but okay.
That's right. Whenever somebody introduces me for a talk, and it's like my Wikipedia biography or something, I always say, thank you for my mother for writing that entry. And now for the rebuttal, my mother-in-law. No, she's actually a very lovely and loving person. COVID. Let me see. We talked about, we mentioned a virus already. You've been saying longer than anybody, even including your brother, that this had all the patterns of an intentional byproduct of maybe perhaps benevolently intended research, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? But this clearly seemed to, and this is back in 2020, early 2020. What have you, besides the awful kind of human costs that we've endured and accelerating, and now with this new variant, like variants aren't going to keep popping up. But tell me, like, how have you, is there one person, people are always asking me, when's Eric going to have the portal back on? I always say, like, I hope never, because, that means more people will come and watch him on my podcast, but just kidding about that. But if you had one guest, that would come on, who would it be? Who would you most like to talk to get the straight truth about it? Would it be, Pfizer, CEO? Would it be Eric Topol? Would it be Anthony Fauci, Francis Collins? Who has the answers, or can at least shed some light and not just heat? Because I know you'd be respectful, but who would you most like to talk to about it?
It's an interesting question. It would very likely be somebody. Well, let's look at what I did do. I contacted Mark Patashny.
Who's that?
Exactly. Not everything that happens on the podcast circuit. And so one of the dangers that we have is it's like, okay, would it be Peter McCulloch or Eric Topol or Peter Attia? And like all those people have tons of knowledge, but Mark Patashny, who wrote The Genetic Switch on phage lambda and T4 bacteriophage, I think, is a giant in the field. And he's one of these guys who's just completely irreverent, doesn't give a crap. He put me in touch with the one of the discoverers of mRNA early on in this. So part of the problem is that there is this podcast circuit. And
I meant that as a framing device, not literally, but yeah.
No, I appreciate that. But I also worry that we're all susceptible to the idea that we keep having the same people on air who are public facing. We both commented that Ed Witten, I think, did only one podcast that I'm aware of. Maybe he's done more, but he did The Universe Speaks in Numbers with Graham Farmello, who was a guest on your program.
That's right.
And, he's the big dog. I would love to see more Nima in the world, but Nima's working hard on what Nima's supposed to be doing.
He's supposed to come on to my show next year, but we'll see.
Inshallah. So the problem is, I think that what we really need is virologists who are not cowed by Anthony Fauci. We need people with independent money. And I think one of the reasons I picked Mark Patashny is that I think he bought a Stradivarius after he founded a biotech company that did well, and he learned to play the Bach double violin concerto when he was like over 40. Remarkable guy, very, very honest, brutal in defense of science. Wow. So my concern is that if you take what just happened with Peter McCulloch on Joe Rogan and some of these debunkings of him, and I think it's disgusting. I think what you have is a group of people. There's no way Peter McCulloch is a wackadoodle who knows nothing about anything. I listened to how much information he has. I can tell when somebody has a ton of knowledge. He may not be entirely truthful, and he may say some things that are very inferential and very dangerous and even irresponsible. But I found the problem is that what he did was extremely informative and extremely irresponsible at the same time. And there's this whole thing about pick a side. Why are you sitting on a fence? It's like, who taught dialectics? Were they sick? And there was a substitute teacher who taught fence sitting. Like, Is it the thesis or is it the antithesis? Which is it? It's like, shut up. What you have is that I want to listen to Peter McCullough, and I also want to listen to Nick Christakis, who are very bitterly opposed to each other, because in part what people are doing is they're taking their responsible commentary and they're doping it with irresponsible inference. And almost everyone is doing this. I'm not positive, Brian, that we aren't. You know, there's only so many times I can say fund your scientists and insulate them. Sooner or later, I'm going to say something crazier, right? Because nobody's listening.
Right.
And I really believe that what's happening with COVID is that we need to get Fauci and Daszak out. This is another one of these things that is almost certainly inferentially to be some sort of a workaround. We signed the Geneva Convention on Biological Weapons, I think in the 70s. We've needed a workaround because we have to protect ourselves defensively, but we're not allowed to work on this stuff offensively. And offense and defense look the same. So is it any surprise that there's like a really weird infectious disease vibe that combines kindly doctors with bedside manners trying to keep us safe with people scouring the planet for the most dangerous stuff and weaponizing it, telling us it is also to keep us safe? I think if people will look at the Eco Health Alliance and Peter Daszak, who's blocked me on Twitter, you will see people, again, I don't hate them. My guess is that they're part of a program, and that program has failed.
Right. It might have had legitimate origins,
but it may have had cryptic origins. It's like, I'm not against crypsis in the state, but my feeling is that somebody needed to understand that cryptic behavior on behalf of a government has to be at an entirely different level. If you're going to do a Keystone Cops clown show in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, while invoking all of our Nobel laureates to tell us that anyone who questions this is a racist because Anthony Fauci is science itself and Francis Collins needs to play the guitar, poof, coronavirus came from overseas. I mean, it's as bad. It's like, I'm 56 years old. I would be a better head of the NIH, or you, or we could just pick my son or your son at 10 years old. I don't want people that we can't trust at any level. Now, I personally would not want that kind of a position. People always ask me, will you run for something? It's like, no, I'd rather recuse myself. But at this point, Brian, some of us have to lead. And we've got to say that this isn't science, because science is taking it on the chin. I think that, we're in a bad marriage with public health. Public health has been running up our credit card like crazy. And I think it's time for a divorce. And we need to say, baby, here's your half of the community property. Go on, keep spending the way you've been spending.
You get the Lambo.
Right, whatever. And get the hell out of my house, because I'm trying to do other things. And I think that the problem that we have is that too much of public health is a gold digger when it comes to science. It wants all of science's respectability. It wants science's respect, but it's not willing to put in the hours. It's not willing to actually understand, well, how did science get to this position of respect? And it's time for us to say that the educators are not basically scholars, and public health people are not scientists. And where we are is in a terrible situation where, for the most part, we have two stories that don't contain all the truth. There's sort of the crazy plandemic story, which is filled with almost certainly conspiratorial nonsense, but gets right all sorts of errors that we've made, probably in a covert bioweapons program, which isn't that surprising, probably around the idea that we put too much stuff on Chinese supply chains that needed to be inside of the US, a giant failing of economists who didn't notice that supposedly efficient things aren't efficient when you're having your geostrategic rival manufacture your essential commodities. We've had a colossal failure of the previous leadership. And I think we need to recognize that we now have the right to investigate whatever we were using to shield Ralph Barrick and Peter Daszak. It's like, maybe we shouldn't have shielded them at the beginning. Maybe things were working. But when you have a screw up this colossal, we need to investigate the Lancet. What happened to one of our most respected journals? And I guess that's my biggest concern, is that we're going to have these battles. Did you see Peter McCullough on Rogan? Oh, did you see Christakis on Sam Harris? It's embarrassing. And both of those guys have truth, and we have to recognize that it's our job to come up with a synthesis.
Yeah, it'll be a Battle Over podcast conducted not by telegraph.
But let's get some people who are not podcast guests, who are extremely disagreeable, very, very honest, and highly respected in the world of virology, particularly older people who are at the end of a career, who grew up in a different
who have
world.
FU intellectual capital. That's right.
Or who don't have that much time left. Mark's old. And, you know, he's always been courageous. And my claim is, let's look at the people, for example, who ran to the defense of Margot O'Toole when she was being savaged by David Baltimore at MIT. Let's see if any of those people are around. And let's get back to people who are willing to take risk on behalf of younger colleagues.
Reclaim it. Okay, we've talked about January 6th. We've talked about crypto apocalypse. We've talked about Fauci and COVID. We've talked about awful things in the Maxwell case. Now I want to pivot to a hopeful subject, something hopeful. The Silurian genocide of 1916. Can we talk? No, I'm just kidding. That's a plateau on the surface of Mars. Speaking of Mars, and speaking of the next year that's approaching us, rapidly approaching at the speed of one-dimensional time. Eric will get that reference. Not many others out there will. But what are you looking forward to? Let me recap your year as I saw it, as a Maxwell demon appearing in, not the Ghislaine Maxwell, Ghislaine Max. I don't even know how you say it. But Ghislaine. Okay. I hope to go through life never knowing how to pronounce that. I saw you doing many things this past year. Starting off with tremendous, public kind of influence as a both through your massive followings on Clubhouse and elsewhere. You got me onto it one night in your backyard. Early on in the year, helping consult with many people working through very serious issues and becoming one of the most popular people on that platform. And then later on in the spring, April Fool's Day, I had you on. You did some other guy named Joe's podcast, as I understand it. But you
that
came
out after.
That's right.
You got the April 1st.
I got the scoop. And that was a huge accomplishment, and I was glad to have an honor to have a tiny microscopic role in it, but giving you encouragement to continue that project. I think it's incredibly valuable. Then a few months after that, you got really the world's attention fixated on this issue of UAPs, both from the perspective of perhaps transdimensional teleport, travel, but also for the interest and actually care as you have for the military and to take this seriously, and people's lives and hearts and so forth are at stake. Soon after that, your birthday, you were playing guitar on stage in front of the Ice House, I believe. Playing
never happened.
Playing
Glass House.
The Glass House, playing Old Town Road by our friend Little Nas X on stage. And then later on in the year, just contributing in so many different ways, giving lectures at Chicago in physics and economics. How many people have done that? And so it was a great year for you. And I'm just wondering, how do you top it? What are you looking forward to in 2022? It's going to be a big year for you, for me, for our families. What are you looking forward to next year?
Connection.
Explain.
I think that one of the reasons that, I keep wanting to restart the podcast in various ways. And I guess I keep thinking...
Please don't. It'll hurt my rating. I'm just kidding.
I keep thinking, don't people realize that this wasn't about a podcast? And it wasn't, I'm trying to hide behind being an entertainer. But it's like, we have to get up off the couch. We got to do a bunch of stuff. And I think people found that it was entertaining. And I was happy because it was supposed to be entertaining. Mm-hmm. But it was supposed to be inspiring. It was supposed to inspire people to, like, your money is about to be inflated away by the Fed. Are you going to do anything about it? Your government may hold information about UFOs. Do you want it? You have a situation in which our children are imperiled by state-protected pedophiles, if I'm not mistaken. Hey, dads, pitchforks, what do we think? Torches? I'd be up for it.
Standard testing and calculus and algebra for.
And so all I hear is it's supposed to be uplifting, but we'll get to the uplifting part. But what I hear is the mouths of termites chewing through our shared infrastructure. Like the planet that we live on as a house is being. I can hear the termites in the drywall. And I'm trying to say, we really need to do something. And people are like, okay, Eric, what are you going to do? So what I'm really looking forward to is connection. Like, I know, for example, that if somebody told me, hey, I know why there are 3 generations of matter. I was like, how sure are you? I'm not quite sure how sure I am. Well, let's talk about it. That's more interesting than what did Kim Kardashian do last week in her relationship with Pete Davidson. I don't care. Oh, Kanye is going to be mad. I don't care. I don't know why we are wasting our time on interpersonal nonsense when we can connect on things that can save us. And I think that what I'm really interested in is trying to understand how to connect more meaningfully with a smaller number of people. And I thought the podcast might be that. And I've gotten unbelievable people to come through. And a lot of people have put in a lot of work and done beautiful things. And I want to thank them. And maybe I should do some individual episodes for that.
Please
but
do. Start with a Hebrew astrophysicist from San Diego. That episode,
okay.
Please.
But I think that what we really need to do is to listen to each other. And that's why I've been listening to, and let me just say something really positive. When I went to the University of Chicago to lecture in the economics department, there was some guy on Twitter who's an economist at Yale who said, wow, Eric Weinstein paid to lecture at Chicago.
And you didn't pay me when you lectured here.
Well, the guy in the talk who was the most, like, the guy who was riding me the hardest, this guy named Harold Ulig. And he was also the guy who the next morning was adamant that I meet with him because he wanted to actually understand, well, what is it that we've done? And I think that the biggest detractor or the biggest critic in real terms, not Twitter critic and, just like being a jerk, is going to end up being potentially the biggest supporter of the theory because it was an important and meaningful connection. And I think one of the things that really encouraged me was how serious people at Chicago are, in particular the econ department. I know that they took a lot of heat for inviting me.
Yeah.
And I put 2 papers up on their money and banking workshop page. Unfortunately, I took my wife off of one of them because of just how nasty so-called econ Twitter is. And if you want to know why women disappear from academics, just look at the amount of bile that was spewed trying to suppress me, which didn't work. I am really excited about the University of Chicago. And I'm excited about the University of Austin. Yeah, they've taken some lumps and people are like, oh my God, you Pinker defected and Zimmer left you. And it's like, okay, maybe it doesn't even work. But I'm excited about people who, to use the old Theodore Roosevelt line, are the man in the arena, the people who are taking the risk to do something positive.
It's not the critic that counts.
And a good critic is a constructive one. But now we've developed this new thing about like, well, you won't face your critics. Well, no. I won't face Mike Tyson as a boxer either. You chew off one ear, you cease to become a boxer. I think that what we need is to connect, to become collegial. And what I hope to do is to figure out what I did wrong, not finding the right people. I think maybe take this behind a paywall, maybe take this someplace which is smaller. I like the idea of having a large audience, but I do notice that I said in Tim Ferriss's podcast that you should only want to be famous to about 3,000 people.
Right.
Well chosen. So I think that the thing to do is to connect. And I think people like Lex, and by the way, my brother, I think, was very early being public about the COVID coming from a lab. So I think that Brett has tried to be very courageous. He's gotten super chewed up. And I think that people need to defend the people who've stood up for you.
Yep.
Joe stands up for you. Brett Weinstein stands up for you. All sorts of people are standing up for you, and they're getting bloodied. And so I think what I want to do is I want to connect and make these things meaningful. And I think you and I are going to try to figure out, how do we restore the scientific process where people talk about speculations, then they talk about instantiations. We test the instantiations with data and theory of its own coming from experiment. And then we come to actually conclusions. And in order to do this, my goal is to rid the world in part of what is destroying collegiality and civility, particularly within the sciences, and then expand it from there.
Well, I love that notion of connection. In fact, Lex and I spoke about this when I was on his podcast. Hopefully that'll come out in early 22. And I said, the meaning of life for me is to build things that would devastate you were they taken away. And I gave the example of, a parent, once you're a parent, there's an infinite number of ways that your life could be made infinitely worse. And there's a finite number of ways your life could even be made 10% better, right? I mean, your daughter gets married or, whatever, or you win the lottery and you have FU money. Okay. There, as I've said before to you, Chern-Simons only has one yacht. Okay. He's lost 2 children. And I think it's incredibly important to think about this kind of notion of connections are those things that even if you don't have kids, that if you envision they were taken away from you, how devastated would you be? And I think you did that with the portal, and you do that. And I think you need to bring it back in some incarnation or another, and not just for personal reasons. But I do feel like
I really appreciate that, Brian.
You're making this deep, huge impact that very few people can have. And I think to those of whom much is given, much is expected, as the good book says, and that is the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Anyway, my friend, it is late. We've been doing this for a while. I want to ask everybody who's listening on my YouTube channel to subscribe to Eric's YouTube channel and follow him on Twitter, wherever else you may find him, Clubhouse and elsewhere. And if you're following Eric, if you'd give my channel a view, that would be worthwhile too. I have a big plans for my channel in the next year, as well as my educational endeavors and my first deployment of the first instruments in the Simons Observatory. You're not going to want to miss that, contributing to our understanding of the evolution, composition, origin of the universe, and possibly maybe other universes. We'll have to talk about that next time.
And you're going to be doing something with theorists to advance this idea of a healthy connection between theory and physics experiment?
That's right. Yeah. So I call that the Assayer project, where we'll be examining using Bayesian and other inference methods to understand how much credulity, how much influence, how much conversation and connection that we should be making between experimentalists and theorists. And there's a tremendous amount of exciting things coming out. I've already recorded great interviews with Harry Cliff and with Reinhard Genzel, winner of the Nobel, and Jocelyn Bell Burnell, who lost the Nobel Prize, about where we can go as a scientific community to best make progress with the limited amount of time, resources, energy, and so forth that we have. So for now.
And do think on a cloudless night, about looking up at the stars and realizing that they don't know anything about Twitter or Instagram or Snapchat, and how many things we are now fenced out of that potentially, if we were able to change our physics picture, might go from being impossible or wildly improbable to doable. It doesn't have to be science fiction. Start dreaming again. And if you have dreams that you think might actually matter and you're a little bit worried about being too earnest in public, get over it and let me know whether or not I should bring back the podcast and what you would want to see on it and whether that's something that's important to you.
Yeah, leave a thumbs up on the video if you think Eric should revive the portal.
I saw what you did there.
Yes, and for now, I'm wishing everybody a wonderful journey into 2022, a healthy, safe end of 2021. And Eric,
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas and Shana Tova. Happy New Year to everybody out there. We love you all. And thanks for joining us on this little trip around the sun for this past year, and look forward to many more in the future. Good night, everybody.
Brian, thanks for all you did over the last year.
Yeah, I love you, Eric. Bye.
I love you too. Be well.